Chapter 282. Most of the things could be placed in this tree hole. Anyway, the seed was in Lu Chen's chest, so it was easy to take it out. However, some self-defense items had to be carried, such as the black dagger that Lu Chen was most comfortable with. As for Atsu, its sharp fangs were its weapons, so there was no need to prepare anything. When everything was almost ready, Lu Chen threw the last bit of meat to Atsu, then patted its head and said, "Eat more, I don't know what will happen later." Atsu obediently lowered its head and began to eat. Lu Chen sat down to rest, quietly waiting for the fateful moment to arrive. Thinking back to the scene when he just escaped into the tree hole, there was a high possibility that the outside of this seed was still under the incomparably dangerous Dragon River. If that was really the case, with the double threat of the boundless river water and ferocious beasts, it was really a hopeless situation with only a slim chance of survival. However, thinking about this at this moment was useless. He could only use the phrase, "leave it to fate," to mock himself. Anyway, staying in this tree hole would only mean starving to death, so he might as well take a gamble. Lu Chen slightly shook his head, shaking off these thoughts that troubled his mind. His gaze swept across the inside of the tree hole, and saw the half of the fire god's staff lying in the corner. After fusing with the cluster of black flames in the puddle, the current fire god's staff could be said to have changed. The surface was obviously much smoother, most of the cracks had also disappeared, and in many places, the faint lines of the totem runes could even be seen. And, as long as Lu Chen held the fire god's staff and activated the power of the black flames, the fire god's staff would shine and brighten. But it was only shining and shining, other than that, it was useless. Lu Chen had tried many times, and many methods, but he could not find the trick to activate the fire god's staff's power. Especially when he was in the barbarian tribe, the strange power of the fire god's staff seemed to have completely disappeared without a trace. It could be said that this fire god's staff was one of the most inexplicable and bizarre magical weapons that Lu Chen had ever seen in his life. However, once he thought that this thing was related to the equally bizarre and ferocious black flame curse, it did not seem strange anymore. Lu Chen held the Vulcan staff in his hand and played with it for a while. After pondering for a while, he put it aside. The origin of this magic treasure was mysterious, and the power it contained was astonishing. However, he didn't know how to use it. If he brought it with him when he went out, it would be very easy for him to accidentally lose it in some dangerous situation. That would not be good. After sitting for a while, Atsu had finished eating all the meat. He licked his lips and walked over with a satisfied look, which was rare for him. Lu Chen stood up and patted Atsu's back. He took a deep breath, smiled at Atsu, and said, "Let's go." Woof. That familiar dizziness made him feel as if the world had turned upside down and the world was spinning. Everything in front of him was pitch black. It was as if he had passed through an endless starry sky, or as if he had passed through the deep sea. There was a constant roar in his ears, but he couldn't make out what exactly it was. That moment was supposed to be short, but it seemed strangely long. Lu Chen could even clearly feel his body floating and swaying, as well as the cold feeling coming from his surroundings. He subconsciously curled up his body, like a lonely child facing the dark night in fear. Then, light shone and sprinkled down. Bang! 2 bodies fell heavily to the ground. At the same time, there was a little splash. When Lu Chen woke up, his first reaction was to immediately grasp the black sword tightly and look around. Atsu, who had fallen at the same time beside him, also reacted quickly. It jumped up, bared its teeth, and looked around fiercely. It was daytime. The scorching sun hung in the sky, and the sunlight shone on the earth. There seemed to be a desolate atmosphere floating in the air. They were on the riverbank of a large river. The river water that washed ashore from time to time even with the bottom of Lu Chen's pants. The river was a large river, and it looked extremely wide. At a glance, it was almost impossible to see the other side. This made Lu Chen subconsciously think of the Dragon River that he had fallen into. Could it be that his luck was so good that the seed was actually washed ashore by the river? For a moment, Lu Chen was in a daze. After a while, he gradually came back to his senses and looked around. He saw that the riverbank he was in was filled with rocks, and the area was also very large. The rocks spread far and wide, and in the distance, there seemed to be a wasteland. As far as his eyes could see, he actually didn't see a single tree. It was the same even on this riverbank. Other than the sound of the flowing river, there was no other sound. Lu Chen slightly frowned, and a trace of vigilance flashed across his eyes. Although this land was quiet, it did not look safe. There was something strange about it. There was plenty of water on the riverbank. Logically speaking, there should be a lot of vegetation. However, not even a single blade of grass grew here, let alone any animals or monsters. The land was dead silent, as if there was no life. After a moment of silence, Lu Chen brought Atsu, who was also a little surprised, and walked a few more steps towards the riverbank. After confirming that there was no danger around, he put away the black short sword in his hand and let out a long breath. Although this land still looked a little strange, no matter what, being able to stand on this land safely was already many times better than the terrible situation that he had expected before he came out. Now that he was temporarily safe, the next thing he had to do was to determine where he was. However, this was where Lu Chen ran into trouble. Apart from the fact that he could roughly determine that the river next to him was the Dragon River, Lu Chen had never heard of this desolate land. He did not know how far the seed had been washed away by the river during this period of time. Although the Dragon River was the boundary river in the central region of the Land of Chaos, in reality, the river still flowed into an unknown place in the depths of the Land of Chaos. Lu Chen faintly felt that he was currently somewhere in the central region of the Land of Chaos. After pondering for a while, Lu Chen finally decided to walk around. At the very least, he had to take a look before deciding. Although this place was full of danger, the good thing was that after surviving this calamity, his pursuers probably wouldn't be able to catch up to him for a while. Because the river bank, or rather, the wasteland behind the rocky beach, looked shockingly vast, almost like a large piece of barren land, Lu Chen didn't dare to rashly enter. Instead, he walked along the direction of the river to see if he could find any clues. However, just as he was about to raise his chi and dash forward, he suddenly let out a muffled groan. His entire face instantly turned pale, and he directly fell to the ground. Atsu, who was standing beside Lu Chen, was shocked. He instinctively jumped away, then hurriedly ran back to Lu Chen and rubbed his head against Lu Chen's body. Lu Chen gasped for breath with an unbearable pain on his face. Beads of sweat seeped out of his forehead. After a while, his painful appearance slowly calmed down and he sat up. His face gradually revealed a trace of disbelief. Just now, when he subconsciously planned to urge the spiritual power in his body to hurry on, all the meridians in his body suddenly twisted together. All of the spiritual power seemed to have instantly gone out of control and crazily crashed into the meridians. That situation was really like being possessed by the devil. Fortunately, after the battle 10 years ago, his body's cultivation was greatly damaged. Today's spiritual power was no longer the same as it was in the past, so the damage caused wasn't too big. If it was any other Foundation establishment or Jean Dan Friar, it was very likely that they would be in danger of exploding. Lu Chen was really shocked. If he couldn't use spiritual power, he was almost no different from an ordinary person. If a slightly more powerful demonic beast came, he wouldn't have the power to protect himself. This place was completely desolate. It really was an extremely sinister place, dangerous and immeasurable. However, it was also at this time that Lu Chen's heart suddenly moved and he thought of something else. The situation just now was a little similar to the legendary deepest part of the Land of Chaos, where the 5 elemental spiritual power had reached the most chaotic and crazy place. It was said that the 5 elemental spiritual power in the deepest part of the Land of Chaos was chaotic and could not be absorbed at all. Even if one used their own spiritual power, they would immediately be affected by the outside world and suffer a backlash. It was one of the most dangerous places in the world. Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. The 5 elemental spiritual energy was so chaotic. Could it be that he wasn't in the middle of the Land of Chaos, but the most dangerous part of the Land of Chaos? Thinking of this, Lu Chen couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. It must be known that the center of the land of chaos was a place of natural danger, led by the chaos abyss, the spirit-shattering sand sea, and other dangerous places. It was a place that even a perfected Yuanian cultivator wouldn't dare to easily set foot in. With his current abilities, he might not be able to get out of this place. After standing in a daze for a moment, Lu Chen quickly calmed down. Since he was already in this situation, he could only take it one step at a time. He turned around and called out to Atsu before continuing forward. However, after taking 2 steps, he suddenly stopped and turned to look at Atsu. He said with some surprise, are you alright? Atsu wagged his tail and skipped a few times beside him, looking rather pleased with himself. Oh, I'm alright. That's great. Lu Chen smiled and said, come over and carry me. With this huge black wolf as a mount, the journey was naturally much longer. As for why this place didn't affect Atsu, it was probably because it was a demonic beast and didn't have any 5 elemental spiritual power. Lu Chen didn't know the reason and couldn't be bothered to think about it. After riding Atsu for half a day, a mountain suddenly appeared in front of him. It was a tall and majestic mountain that blocked out the sun. Chapter 283. It was the tallest mountain that Lu Chen had ever seen in his life. It was even bigger than Kunlun Mountain. The mountain was still far away on the horizon, but just by looking at its tall figure, there was a terrifying aura pressing down on them. It was not a mountain, but a boundless city wall that blocked the heaven and earth. The 2 ends of the mountain range stretched for tens of thousands of miles, and the end could not be seen. The mountain peak was extremely tall and towered into the sky. About 1,000 feet above the ground, there was a line of snow, and above that was a vast expanse of white snow. The white clouds were misty, layer upon layer. It seemed that they were only at the middle of the mountain, and the higher mountain peaks were so high that they could not be seen. Such a magnificent spectacle was really rare in the world. Lu Chen and Atsu looked ahead and held their breath. But after coming back to his senses, Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed, and an ominous premonition suddenly flashed through his mind. Unlike the vast wasteland where not even a blade of grass grew, he had heard of this towering and exceptionally majestic mountain in the past. Legend has it that in the deepest part of the land of chaos, there was a huge mountain peak that stretched across the land. It was called the Great Snow Mountain. It was the home of the ferocious and valiant barbarian tribe. There were countless ferocious and peerless demonic beasts in the huge mountain range, and the height of the mountain was unimaginably high, reaching into the clouds. Since ancient times, it had the nickname of Pillar of Heaven and Earth. For thousands of years, no one had ever been able to cross this huge mountain. Firstly, the mountain was steep and difficult to climb, and the demonic beasts in the mountain were extremely ferocious. Once one climbed to the top, it was said that there was an extremely cold wind at the top of the mountain that was unheard of in the world. Not to mention flesh and blood, even the ancient beasts, and even the highly skilled Yuanian Jinren could not withstand it. As a result, the Great Snow Mountain became a natural moat that separated the north and the south. The only exception was that after a long period of time, there would be an earth-shattering change on the Great Snow Mountain, and then the beasts would go quiet, the wind and snow would stop, and a road would appear. In the great battle between the humans and the berserkers in the past, the berserkers had seized that chance to attack the north en masse. In the end, they had suffered a crushing defeat. If the huge mountain in front of him was the legendary Great Snow Mountain, didn't that mean that he was no longer in the middle of the land of chaos, but in the core of the land of chaos? He might even be close to the southern wastelands. Lu Chen's expression turned ugly. If that was really the case, then the situation was much worse than he had expected. Sitting on the back of Atsu, he looked left and right. On one side was the barren wilderness, and on the other side was the seemingly smooth-flowing river. Lu Chen frowned. At the same time, he tried his best to recall all the memories he had of the Dragon River. However, no matter how he thought about it, he found that although the river was full of life, it was shrouded in mist. Most importantly, all the questions about where the river flowed to, the answer was almost the same. It turned into the depths of the chaotic lands and disappeared without a trace. His whereabouts are unknown? How could such a huge river disappear without a trace? Why couldn't he just follow the direction of the river? Why couldn't he find it? This seemingly simple question seemed to hide an unfathomable and terrifying secret. Atsu stood quietly, occasionally flicking its tail. Lu Chen pondered in silence for a while, then patted its head and said, "Let's go. No matter what, let's go ahead and take a look." Atsu raised its head and looked at the towering great snow mountain in the distance. It looked at the barren wilderness illuminated by the scorching sun in the sky. Suddenly, it let out a long howl and ran with all its might. Like a black wind, it blew across the barren wilderness and the riverbank. Countless rocks swept past them and disappeared from sight. This run lasted for a very long time. The river was frighteningly long. When the sky darkened, Lu Chen estimated that they had run for at least 100 or 200 kilometers, but the river did not seem to have changed. The scenery in front of them also did not change. It was still a stretch of desolation. This was the result of Atsu's extraordinary endurance after it had advanced to the holy beast rank. If it were any other demon beast, it would have collapsed from exhaustion. At dusk, Lu Chen and Atsu stopped and prepared to spend the night on this frighteningly large riverbank. The situation in front of him was very strange. Logically speaking, if he was really near the Great Snow Mountain, then there should be even more dangerous demonic beasts hibernating in the land of chaos. But after running for such a long time, Lu Chen had not encountered a single demonic beast. It was also very strange. Although it was a good thing that they did not encounter the threat of demon beasts, there was another problem. There was no food. This riverbank wasteland was too desolate. Not even a blade of grass grew. Lu Chen and Atsu could not possibly live on rocks. However, Lu Chen and Atsu really ran over to look at some of the big and small rocks on the ground. But this place was really desolate. Other than rocks, there was only wasteland. There was not even a small worm. Fortunately, heaven never bars one's way. Although the riverbank was desolate, at least there was a big river next to it, right? Lu Chen thought of several methods and used almost all the means available to him. Finally, he caught a few fish from the water of the river. The fish in this river were also very different from the fish that Lu Chen had seen in the past. They were almost all different species that he had never seen before. Moreover, they were very fierce and aggressive. Lu Chen and Atsu were almost bitten. But it was also in the process of fishing that Lu Chen unexpectedly discovered that although he could not use his 5 elemental spiritual energy and various means, the power of the black fire seemed to be completely unaffected by the chaotic 5 elemental spiritual energy in this area. He could use it freely. It was also because of this that he was able to catch those big fish in the end. However, when Atsu ate the fish, it looked like it was in pain. From time to time, it would look at Lu Chen with some complaints. Lu Chen stared at the stupid dog and said, "It's good enough that you have something to eat. Isn't the meat a little sour?" "It's fine." That night, the riverbank was very dark and very cold. Lu Chen almost didn't sleep much. Fortunately, the night passed safely. There were no dangers that only existed at night, and no monsters suddenly crawled out of the river. After dawn, Lu Chen and Atsu continued to move forward. However, after running, Lu Chen quickly felt that today's Atsu was obviously faster than yesterday. At the same time, its body was stronger. Was it the result of eating the fish in the river? A few days ago, when they were hiding in the mysterious tree hole, Lu Chen basically gave Atsu ordinary meat. There was no essence or spiritual energy to speak of. As for the fish that lived in the river, it should be a kind of monster. This stupid dog was really picky. If he didn't give it good food, it wouldn't work. On this day, Atsu's speed was much faster than yesterday. When it was almost noon, the desolate and lifeless scenery that had always been the same finally changed. The first person to notice something wrong was Lu Chen. He saw that the river that had been flowing smoothly suddenly began to become a little turbulent. At the same time, the river seemed to be faintly narrowing. As they continued forward, a rumbling sound suddenly came from the originally quiet wilderness. It was like a thunderclap, like a landslide, and also like a torrent crashing against a hard rock. It made one's heart skip a beat. This time, without waiting for Lu Chen to call, Atsu first slowed down and looked forward. Lu Chen's face was a little dignified. He jumped down from the back of Atsu and looked into the distance. There seemed to be a vague black slowly wriggling in the distance. All the sounds came from that direction, and the river next to him was also flowing in that direction. It seemed that he finally found a result. Lu Chen narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at the darkness in front of him, and then suddenly patted Atsu's head and whispered, "You stay here, I will go and take a look." After saying that, he walked forward. When stepping on the uneven stone beach, Lu Chen suddenly found that there were some black marks on the surface of many stones under his feet. He paused for a moment, squatted down beside a stone with a black mark, and then found that it seemed to be traces of burning. When he stood up, he soon found that the stone beach he was standing on at the moment was almost full of such stones with black marks, and there were countless of them everywhere, covering an astonishingly large area. But, on this barren and desolate river beach, how could there be such a huge sea of fire burning? Things were getting more and more strange, and Lu Chen's pupils also slightly contracted. However, after a moment, he still continued to walk forward. However, after he had taken 3 to 5 steps, he suddenly heard a commotion behind him. When he turned around to look, he saw that Atsu had finally caught up to him and walked to his side. Lu Chen was startled, and then he showed a trace of a smile. He didn't say anything, just patted its back, and then one person and one dog continued to walk forward. After walking for a while, the darkness in front of him began to gradually become clear, and the river around him flowed more and more rapidly. The sound of the water was intense like thunder. When they continued to walk forward, an unimaginably huge pit, or a huge cave suddenly appeared in front of Lu Chen's eyes. At this point, the river suddenly made a loud noise, and countless streams of water rushed into the air, then turned into an unimaginably huge waterfall, flew straight down, and fell into the abyss. Yes, this was a dark abyss, a huge and bottomless abyss. The darkness condensed under the abyss, but there were countless light spots flickering in the darkness, emitting a silver-white light, shining like stars in the dark sky. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled incessantly in the darkness, and one could clearly see that the starlight formed a beautiful picture. The darkness was like a tidal wave, floating and sinking in the abyss, forming a strange scene. When Lu Chen stood at the edge of this abyss, he looked like an insignificant ant, looking at the unimaginable miracle in this world in shock. Chapter 284. The abundant and surging water of the river turned into a huge waterfall, plunging straight into the darkness, and then disappeared without a trace. From afar, it looked like a white jade belt hanging in the night. Standing next to this black and huge abyss, it was as if the sky and earth had been turned upside down. The night sky was below, and the earth was above. The darkness and the strange starlight and white light formed a strange scene, and it was not static. Like clouds flowing, everything in the abyss seemed to be rotating, just like the vast and boundless galaxy in the sky had produced a terrifying vortex, as if it was going to devour everything in this world. Lightning flashed, twisting and passing through the black, cloudy galaxy, and there were bursts of low but majestic thunder from the depths of the abyss from time to time. Occasionally, when two blazing and dazzling lightning collided, it suddenly burst out an unimaginably dazzling light, illuminating the deep, night sky, but then it quickly dimmed, and then was swallowed by an even larger wave of darkness. Lu Chen only felt that his throat was a little dry. He stared blankly at the strange scenery below, which was almost beyond human imagination, and was shocked by this huge and incredible scene. Just as Lu Chen was lost in thought, he suddenly heard a few hurried roars from beside him. Immediately after, he felt a grip on his wrist, and a sharp pain accompanied by a great force that pulled him backwards abruptly came over. Lu Chen let out a pained groan, and his body jolted awake. He saw that Atsu had opened his mouth for some unknown reason, and was biting his hand with all his might, trying to drag it backwards. He was shocked and angry, and just when he was about to scold, his body suddenly trembled, and he found that he had already walked to the edge of the abyss, and half of his foot was already hanging outside. If he took half a step forward, he would directly fall into this mysterious and terrible abyss. It turned out that just now, unknowingly, he seemed to have lost his consciousness. If it were not for Atsu, who was still awake and pulled him back, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lu Chen hurriedly retracted his foot, which was already halfway into the abyss, and took a few steps back. His face was a little pale, and he was gasping for breath. At the same time, he was horrified. This mysterious abyss seemed to have a strange power that could make people walk into a trap. It was really creepy. After a while, Lu Chen calmed down a little, but he didn't dare to look at this strange abyss anymore. He turned around and touched the head of Atsu, who was standing beside him. Just when he was about to speak, he suddenly saw the huge mountain in the distance. His body trembled again. In that instant, he suddenly knew where this place was. Under the Great Snow Mountain, in the Chaos Abyss. The Great Snow Mountain, the Primal Chaos Abyss, and the Shattered Spirit Sand Sea. These three places were the most dangerous and terrifying core areas of the Land of Chaos. When he and Atsu hid in the mysterious tree hole, the river water of the Dragon River had actually washed the seed all the way to the deepest part of the Land of Chaos. Even in the flourishing cultivation world of the human race, it had been many years since anyone had come close to the core areas of the Land of Chaos. These most dangerous places in the world seemed to have become legends. This result far exceeded Lu Chen's initial plans. One had to know that he had only wanted to take the risk to enter the central area of the Land of Chaos. After standing in place for a while, Lu Chen shook his head and sighed helplessly. He glanced at Atsu and found that Atsu was also looking at him with concern, as if worried that this man had been scared silly. "All right, at least we are still alive," Lu Chen said to Atsu in a self-deprecating manner and shrugged his shoulders. No matter what, standing so close to the Primal Chaos Abyss, one of the three most dangerous places in the Land of Chaos, was not a pleasant thing, even if it seemed like nothing had happened for the time being. "Let's go and take a look at the other places," Lu Chen said to Atsu and turned to leave. Atsu was just about to follow when all of a sudden, the black wolf's fur stood on end and it bared its fangs. It let out a ferocious growl once again, as if it had seen a terrifying beast, revealing a look of terror. Lu Chen was shocked. Just as he was about to comfort Atsu, he suddenly felt the ground beneath his feet shake violently. Then, several earth-shattering claps of thunder rang out from the Primal Chaos Abyss. Lu Chen turned to look in the direction of the sound and saw that the river in the distance, which had already become turbulent, suddenly began to twist and ripple. In the huge abyss, black waves surged violently, each wave higher than the one before. Lightning was swimming around crazily. Rays of starlight shone brightly. The darkness was full and surging. The dark vortex spun faster and faster. Suddenly, there was a moment when everything stopped. Heaven and earth held their breath and all things froze. All of a sudden, a loud noise that seemed to tear the sky and shatter the vault of heaven rang out from the abyss of chaos. A dark torrent rushed straight up to the sky from the depths of the whirlpool. All the clouds and mist were scattered in front of this terrible dark torrent. They could only stare at this strange scene that pierced through the sky. The clouds in the sky changed color. After a while, the giant black pillar gradually shrunk and disappeared. The Primal Chaos Abyss slowly regained its calm. Lu Chen was shocked. Suddenly, he saw a small black dot appear in the sky. The black dot fell from the sky at a very fast speed. It gradually became bigger and bigger in his sight. It turned out to be a fist-sized black stone burning with flames. With an astonishing whistling sound, it fell from the sky. After a while, it smashed heavily on the ground hundreds of feet away from Lu Chen and Atsu, making a deafening roar. The ground trembled, and the black fire burned high into the sky. The ground was immediately scorched black. At the same time, sand and stones flew. Obviously, the force of the impact was astonishing. Lu Chen looked at the burning flames and the big pit on the ground. Suddenly, his face changed. At that moment, he suddenly thought of the black marks left on the ground. Go! He suddenly let out an angry roar, flipped over and jumped onto Atsu's back, hugged its neck and shouted, "Run!" Atsu seemed to have sensed something. It let out a long roar and rushed out with all its might. At the same time, in the boundless sky, a second black dot appeared, then a third, a fourth. More and more, until it was impossible to count. The entire sky was filled with black falling rocks, carrying with them endless flames and terrifying whistling sounds as they fell to the ground. Atsu roared and ran. Its body was as agile as lightning. It jumped and weaved, and even the rocks of different heights couldn't stop it. But soon, the burning black stones that fell from the sky began to hit the ground. At first, it was 1 or 2 stones. Soon, it was too much for the eyes to take in. The roar was deafening. The sound of explosions and the trembling of the ground were endless. The burning flames began to spread across the land. Every falling boulder would cause a sea of fire and a large amount of sand and dust. Carrying Lu Chen on its back, Atsu desperately ran away in this doomsday-like scene. It passed through every narrow gap and dodged the feast of the Grim Reaper. Even if the flames burned its skin and flesh, it didn't flinch. There were many times when it was only a thin line between life and death. The terrifying rain of fire covered the land. If Atsu made the slightest mistake, it and Lu Chen would stay on this land forever. But in the end, Atsu still roared and rushed out with its body covered in flames and dust. It avoided the falling stones along the way and left the seemingly endless rain of fire behind. The thrill of the journey was indescribable. Even Lu Chen himself felt that he was in a desperate situation and couldn't escape anymore. But in the end, Atsu, the magical holy beast that was only good at escaping, exerted all its strength and finally brought him out. When the rain of fire subsided and the world became peaceful again, Lu Chen and Atsu stood at the edge of the land that had become a sea of fire. When they looked back, they were both speechless. At this moment, their bodies were all gray and black. Lu Chen's clothes and Atsu's fur were torn and burned in many places. And in the place where they were just now, no living creature could survive within a radius of more than 100 miles. Lu Chen finally knew where the black marks on the stones that he saw before came from. A dangerous place like the Chaos Abyss was indeed extraordinarily terrifying. And when he looked back into the distance, a desolate and withered wasteland appeared in front of him. It was boundless. "Let's go, Atsu," he said softly. Atsu responded in a low voice. It wagged its tail and followed him into the vast and desolate distance. At that time, the sun was setting in the west. Under the setting sun, their shadows were particularly long and thin, and they were cast on the desolate and boundless desert. Chapter 285. Lu Chen and Atsu barely avoided the terrifying rain of fire from the primal chaos abyss. It could be said that they had a narrow escape from death. Without any hesitation, they left the area. They could not go to the Great Snow Mountain either. It was a dangerous place that was on par with the abyss of chaos. Even if they went there, they would most likely die. As for the remaining path, they did not have many choices. On one side was the boundless desert, while the other was to walk back along the rocky beach and look upstream of the river. After much thought, Lu Chen finally decided to turn back and walk upstream. If this river was the Longshuan River, they might have a chance of finding their way back. As for the seemingly vast wasteland, it was too easy to associate it with the broken spirit sand sea that was on par with the abyss of chaos and the Great Snow Mountain. Although Lu Chen could not be sure that it was that place, if the abyss of chaos and the Great Snow Mountain had both appeared, it would not be strange for the broken spirit sand sea to appear as well. In this strange and unpredictable region, danger lurked everywhere. If they wanted to survive, they had to be careful. Even so, Lu Chen did not have much confidence that they would be able to walk out of this dangerous place. They slowly approached the river and began to swim upstream. At the same time, Lu Chen carefully maintained a distance from the river. He would only approach the river when he needed to feed on the fish in the river. Just like that, they walked for a few days without encountering any accidents. Although this was a good thing, Lu Chen still felt a little strange. It was hard to say if he had not been to the Great Snow Mountain, but the abyss of chaos that he had seen was an incomparably strange and dangerous place. It was very much in line with the legendary core zone of the disorienting lands. However, the legends also said that the disorienting lands was dangerous to the point where danger lurks every 3 steps and danger every 5 steps. Not to mention ordinary people, even Yuanyingzhenren would have to be on high alert to deal with it. However, he had been walking here for a few days without encountering any danger. This was a little strange. Something did not seem right. During this period of time, he was suddenly in this dangerous place. Naturally, it was because when he hid in the seed, he was somehow swept here by the river. Lu Chen originally thought that he would be able to find some clues to return after walking upstream for a few days, but now he realized that he might have been wrong. Although he didn't remember staying in that mysterious tree hole for too long, at least with the gluttonous Atsu around, the food wouldn't last that long. But now, after walking for several days, Lu Chen found that the surrounding scenery did not seem to have changed at all. It was still a river and a desolate plain. Come to think of it, it was probably only when it was at the bottom of the Dragon River that the tiny seed was instantly washed far away by the rapid currents. That was how it managed to arrive at the abyss of chaos in this period of time. With this uncertain guess, Lu Chen and Atsu walked for a few more days. About 9 days after they left the abyss of chaos, they finally noticed something unusual. There was no change in the surging river, nor in the vast wilderness. However, in a patch of yellow sand ahead, Lu Chen saw a corpse that had decayed beyond recognition. The skeleton buried in the yellow sand looked a little scary, but after discovering it, Lu Chen's spirits were lifted and he was very happy. No matter what, the appearance of a skeleton meant that someone had been here before. To him, this was equivalent to a timely piece of news. The skeleton was extremely decayed, and most of it had been weathered into sand. Even the sturdiest skull had decayed in many places. However, after careful observation, Lu Chen quickly frowned and a strange look flashed across his eyes. This skeleton that had died at an unknown time looked like a human, but Lu Chen saw a broken fang near the jaw. He was shocked because it was impossible for a human to have this. This dead person was a barbarian. Atsu walked to Lu Chen's side and raised its head to look at him. Lu Chen straightened his body. After a moment of silence, he said to Atsu in a low voice, let's go forward and take a look. I hope my guess is wrong." At this moment, Lu Chen was guessing in his heart. He did not say anything, and Atsu had no way to ask. Of course, although Atsu was now a holy beast, it still did not know the human language, so it could not ask. The two of them stepped over the skeleton and continued forward. The dry wind blew from the wilderness and blew up a patch of yellow sand, drowning the hideous skeleton. The discovery of this skeleton was like a watershed. From this day onwards, the direction that Lu Chen and Atsu were moving in began to change. Grass and trees began to appear on this piece of land. Although they were sparse and did not form a forest, it was clear that the situation was slowly improving. The aura of life began to thicken in this piece of land. Later, Lu Chen actually saw a small oasis formed by a small forest in the desert. There were some small animals there, but they were not demonic beasts. They looked a little strange and seemed to be very different from the creatures in the divine central continent. At the very least, some of the beasts in this place looked very weak. Lu Chen caught 2 beasts that looked similar to wild rabbits as a way to improve his and Atsu's meals. It was unknown whether it was because no one had come here for a long time, but these weak beasts did not seem to be able to resist. However, Atsu seemed to have no interest in the meat of these weak beasts. It used its mouth to pull Lu Chen's clothes and dragged him toward the river. It looked like it wanted to eat the fish in the river. Lu Chen was also helpless. In the end, he could only help it catch 2 more beasts to deal with it. After that, they continued to move forward. Lu Chen had a feeling that the change he was looking for might be right in front of him. However, this change came very quickly and was also very big, so much so that Lu Chen was somewhat unprepared. On the second morning after he left the small oasis, he and Atsu were still walking upstream in a desolate wasteland when they suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the desert in the distance. The sound was unusually desolate and tragic, and the tone was boundless, as if it was recalling an ancient epic to the heavens. However, Lu Chen's expression immediately turned ugly because he felt that the voice was a little familiar. After thinking for a moment, he felt that this voice was similar to the voice of the old shaman he had heard in the battle with the barbarian tribe in the mountain ridge next to the evil Python Valley. This discovery made him look a little solemn. He informed Atsu, and then quietly ran toward the source of the sound. There was a big sand dune about 100 feet in front of them. Lu Chen and Atsu ran in that direction. As they got closer, more and more sounds came. It was like the howling of wild beasts, the blood-boiling sound of war drums, the crazy roars, and the roars seemed to be mixed with a bit of majesty. They climbed up, and then when they reached the top of the sand dune, they quietly poked their heads out. A battlefield appeared in front of them. It was a fierce battle involving hundreds of people. It was fierce and bloody, crazy and tyrannical. It was unfolding in front of them without any warning. About 100 feet below the sand dune, all the warriors on the battlefield were tall and burly barbarian warriors with tusks in their mouths. Most of them were bare-chested, and they were holding weapons made of huge stones in their hands. They were fighting in a violent manner. This battle seemed to be halfway through, and it had reached the most intense moment. Both sides were in a killing frenzy. Blood flowed everywhere, and corpses were everywhere. It was unknown how many barbarians had been decapitated, and their limbs were severed. The scene was extremely bloody. Atsu let out a low growl, and it seemed to be a little nervous. Lu Chen gently patted its head, but his expression didn't look good either. He turned his head and looked at the road they had come from, and the unusually long and wide river. He was speechless for a moment. Such a fierce battle between barbarians must be a war between two big tribes, and it was impossible for such a situation to happen in such a dangerous environment like the chaotic land. He secretly smiled bitterly, with a bit of self-mockery. He whispered to himself, "I've actually been washed to the southern wilderness." Yes, it was very likely that Lu Chen and Atsu were in the southern wilderness, where only the barbarians lived. The great snow mountain and the abyss of chaos he had seen were all real. But what was different from what he had imagined was that he and Atsu were now on the other side of the most dangerous area in the chaotic land. Perhaps, he was the first human to set foot in the southern wilderness in thousands of years? Of course, this wasn't something to be happy about. The southern barbarian territory had been separated from the chaotic lands for thousands of years, and there were almost no humans here. Moreover, if the legends were true, there were many barbarians who had the vile habit of eating human flesh. Similarly, if this was the southern wilderness, it could finally explain why the spiritual power of the five elements was so abnormal that it almost crippled Lu Chen's cultivation. On the other hand, the power of the black flame in Lu Chen's body was not damaged at all. It was probably because this power originated from this place. He smiled bitterly in his heart, and also had a headache about how to survive in the future. But with a loud roar, Lu Chen's attention was quickly drawn to the battle. He saw that at the back of one of the barbarian tribes, there seemed to be someone who was finally dissatisfied with this bloody and indecisive war. Then, a barbarian dressed in black and looking like a priest walked out. He raised his hands to the sky, and loudly chanted an incantation. After a while, a magic tool appeared in his hand, which seemed to be a piece of yellow wood. Then, as he chanted the incantation faster and faster, the yellow wood began to light up with runes, and a strong spiritual power began to fill the air. Totem power? Lu Chen's expression immediately turned solemn. This scene was very similar to that of the barbarian tribe he had seen in the disordered land. He just didn't know if the effect of this priest's spell would be the same as that of the old priests. Lu Chen stared at that side, his eyes shining. Chapter 286. The ancient incantation began to reverberate in the sky above the fierce battlefield, and immediately caused a commotion among the warriors on both sides. The difference was that the warriors on the side with the priest all revealed expressions of joy, while the warriors on the other side had expressions of fear on their faces. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, these incomparably valiant barbarian warriors, who would rather die than retreat in the face of blood and slaughter, would actually be afraid of the power of the priest. It seemed that to these warriors, this strange power was more awe-inspiring than death itself. Of course, Lu Chen could not understand this inexplicable mentality. They were not even afraid of bleeding to death, and yet they were afraid of this unknown magic? Come to think of it, perhaps these barbarian warriors had been instilled with the idea that the priest's magic was unparalleled since they were young. Otherwise, it was really incomprehensible. However, at this moment, he could not care about these things, because when he saw the magic staff in the hands of the priest when he cast the spell, his heart suddenly moved. He immediately reached out to touch his chest, and in the next moment, the half of the fire god's staff appeared in his hand. From afar, he compared the half of the fire god's staff with the magic staff in the hands of the distant priest. Very quickly, Lu Chen noticed that there was a huge difference between the two. The color of the magic staff in the hands of the priest was bright, and the whole body was smooth. Many runes were directly engraved on the magic staff, and even when it was not casting a spell, it could still be seen very clearly. However, after the priest cast the spell, although the entire magic staff emitted a yellow light, and the runes also lit up, it was in the form of dots. Many of the runes did not respond, and were still dark. Those dots of light also did not show any signs of connecting. Recalling the appearance of the fire god's staff when it was stimulated by the black fire spiritual power, Lu Chen discovered that all the twisted and complicated runes on the fire god's staff had a natural feeling of blending with water. Once the fire god's staff was stimulated by the spiritual power was like a stream of water, flowing through all the runes in the blink of an eye. Every place and every rune would light up, forming an incomparably complete totem. Up until now, the fire god's staff in Lu Chen's hands was only emitting light, barely able to be used as a torch. However, Lu Chen still felt that the fire god's staff should be much stronger than the staff in the priest's hands. Perhaps, just like what the old priest of the barbarian tribe had said before his death, this was a divine weapon? The fire god's divine weapon, the fire god's choice? Lu Chen curled his lips and put down the Vulcan staff. On the battlefield below, the priest had already finished chanting his incantation. Soon, a powerful force was emitted from the staff in his hand. Several yellow rays of light shot out and shot into the ground in front of him. At the same time, Lu Chen suddenly felt a slight warmth in his hand, and Atsu, who had been lying beside him, suddenly moved a little to the side, as if it was startled by something. After a while, their gazes looked down at the same time. They saw that the half of the Vulcan staff was actually trembling by itself. A ray of light that was not particularly bright was flickering in the runes on the body of the staff. However, the Vulcan staff's reaction stopped there. It gave off a feeling of disdain. After the light flickered for a while, it gradually dimmed. On the battlefield below the sand dune, there was already a strange change. At the center of the battlefield where the two sides were fighting fiercely, the ground suddenly trembled violently. The surrounding barbarian warriors suddenly lost their balance and fell to the ground. After a while, a low rumbling sound came from the ground. A large area of sand and stones suddenly arched up. Smoke and dust flew everywhere, and countless small stones rolled down. Then, under the shocked gazes of the crowd, a huge stone puppet that was more than 2 feet tall appeared on the battlefield. This stone puppet, whose entire body was condensed from stones and sand, raised its head towards the sky and roared. Its voice was like thunder, then it slowly turned around and walked towards the enemy camp. With every step it took, the ground would tremble. This indicated that the stone puppet's body was abnormally heavy. Looking at the terrifying stone giant that had suddenly appeared, it was obvious that it was not an opponent that ordinary people could fight against. The barbarian warriors who had been fighting bravely before also began to show signs of hesitation and fear in their eyes. Some of them even began to retreat. The situation of the battlefield that was originally evenly matched was suddenly reversed after the appearance of the stone puppet. The morale of the barbarian warriors who had the power of the priest had obviously risen. All the barbarian warriors roared and rushed forward. They either slashed and chased after the stone puppet, or directly entangled the opponent so that the stone puppet behind them could catch up. Seeing that the situation was about to get out of control, a few people suddenly jumped out from the back of the barbarian warriors who were at a disadvantage. But, none of these people were like the priest. They seemed to be stronger warriors and leaders. They shouted at their subordinates, and drove them back to fight. Lu Chen was watching from the side of the sand dune. He could also see that something was wrong. The barbarian army with the priest had a unified command. Even their clothing was similar. On the other side, although the number of barbarian warriors wasn't small, but after a long time, he could see that the warriors of several different tribes had joined forces to fight together. These barbarian warriors were also very brave and valiant. But, when the leader of the barbarian warriors came out, the situation immediately became chaotic. The warriors of each tribe only listened to the leader of their tribe. So, the scene suddenly became chaotic. The stone puppet had dragged its heavy body to the front. It let out a loud roar, and kicked its huge stone foot towards the barbarian warriors. A gust of wind blew past, and a few barbarian warriors who couldn't dodge in time were kicked. Immediately, deafening screams could be heard, and a few bodies were kicked away. Blood splattered everywhere, and their bones were broken and their flesh was torn. Then, the stone puppet raised its arm, and smashed its huge fist into the crowd of barbarian warriors. Boom! The ground shook, and a few barbarian warriors who couldn't dodge in time were smashed into a pile of flesh and blood. The other barbarian warriors seemed to be scared out of their wits. They screamed madly, and retreated with all their might. It seemed that they wanted to get as far away from this inhumane stone puppet as possible. The situation instantly collapsed. Even though the leaders of the allied army were trying their best to drive their warriors away, they couldn't control the barbarian warriors who were retreating. On the opposite side, a large group of warriors were laughing wildly. They were waving their blood-stained blades, and were following the stone puppet. On the side of the allied army, everyone's faces were ashen, and despair could be seen on their faces. Some of them seemed to be extremely angry. They tore their clothes, beat their chests, and roared, "Why do they have a priest? Didn't the priest of the mountain spirit tribe die decades ago?" Blood splattered everywhere on the bloody battlefield. Many people were bleeding and collapsing, and an even greater massacre was about to descend. Lu Chen, who was hiding behind a sand dune in the distance, didn't feel anything. He had been used to death and blood for so many years. Once he hardened his heart, he could be extremely cold. Not to mention that both sides were barbarians, so he didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy for them. So, when one side was about to be slaughtered, he didn't feel anything. He just calmly watched for a while, and felt that he shouldn't stay here any longer. Once the battle was over, the barbarians on the winning side would definitely clean up the battlefield. At that time, if he wasn't careful and was discovered by the barbarian warriors who had just escaped from the battle, it would be a big problem. Especially the priest hiding in the depths of the battle. Although Lu Chen faintly felt that the priest's methods, especially his magic staff, were not as good as the fire god's staff that he had obtained, but the various strange witchcraft and methods of the southern border barbarians were still hard to guard against. So, he finally decided not to cause any trouble. He turned his head and called out to Atsu softly, "Let's go." Atsu wagged its tail and crawled up from the ground. Lu Chen was about to retreat down the sand dune when he found that the fire god's staff was still in his hand. At this moment, it was still slightly hot, but the light on the staff was almost gone. He shrugged his shoulders and was about to put away the fire god's staff when he suddenly found that the priest in the distance had a solemn expression on his face. His hands were twisting in the air, as if he was in the process of controlling the stone puppet. Seeing that victory was in his grasp, it was obvious that the priest's face revealed an obvious look of arrogance. Then, he looked around and saw that the barbarian warriors surrounding him were all looking at him with reverence. The way they looked at him was like that of a god. The priest was extremely pleased with himself and couldn't help but laugh out loud. He had the intention to show off. As long as I can completely make these brainless barbarians who only have a body of flesh and blood respect me, I can successfully subdue this mountain spirit tribe. When I return to the war god temple, I'm sure the few shamans will be even more satisfied with me. The priest snorted coldly and made up his mind. He grabbed the staff beside him with both hands and didn't seem to cast a spell. In the blink of an eye, a violent force flowed out from the staff and poured into the distance. The power accompanied by the blazing yellow light directly passed over the heads of the crowd and landed on the stone puppet. Immediately, the originally incomparably powerful stone puppet seemed to have suddenly been stimulated, and its movements actually became twice as fast as before. Even the most obvious flaw was almost fixed. With this, the stone puppet became even more of a terrifying killing machine. It swept across the battlefield and slaughtered flesh and blood. In the blink of an eye, it was about to kill its way through the enemy's formation. The priest laughed out loud and the barbarians around him cried out in surprise. Their faces were full of reverence and they looked as if they were about to kneel on the ground. It was also at this moment that the fire god's staff, which had calmed down in Lu Chen's hand, suddenly lit up. Just like a will that had been provoked again. Chapter 287. It was a sudden ray of light that rose from the fire god's staff. The entire sand dune seemed to be shrouded in this ray of light in an instant. It was majestic and turbulent, and the light was like fire, roaring loudly. Almost at the same time, all the barbarian warriors who were immersed in the bloody slaughter and life and death situation on the battlefield did not notice the abnormality on the sand dune next to the battlefield. The only one who felt it was the priest who was casting the spell with the staff in his hand. The earthy yellow staff that was at its peak state and invincible on the battlefield suddenly trembled violently. A few rays of light immediately shot back and returned to the staff, flickering non-stop, as if it was vigilant. The stone puppet in front of it seemed to have lost a part of its strength, and its speed and agility also slowed down. But even so, this terrifying and powerful stone puppet was still a terrifying existence that could not be defeated on the battlefield. The situation of the battle still did not change, and even the two sides did not feel anything wrong. At most, they thought that the priest felt that this little bit of power was enough to win, and there was no need to waste any more energy. However, at this moment, the priest's face suddenly became solemn. Just at that moment, he clearly felt a powerful, origin power, suddenly appear around him. This kind of pure and powerful spiritual power was something he had only seen from the few shamans in the war god temple in the past. Could it be that a powerful shaman had suddenly come here? The moment this thought surfaced in his mind, the priest's face instantly turned pale. Like the surrounding barbarian warriors who worshipped him, he was even more in awe of the few shamans who were at the peak of the barbarian race's power. He did not even dare to think of making an enemy out of them. However, very soon, the priest noticed that something was wrong. Because other than the wave of spiritual power, he did not feel the monstrous aura that seemed to be able to cover the sky and cover the sun that he was so familiar with. This discovery made the priest feel slightly relieved, and his eyes immediately swept around. After a moment, his eyes fell on the sand dune at the side of the battlefield. There seemed to be a ball of fire burning there, and the fire seemed to be enveloping the entire hill. And the wave of spiritual power that he felt before was coming from there. After seeing the fire, the priest could not help but be startled. Fire spiritual power? Didn't this power disappear from the wilderness for thousands of years? A moment later, the priest sneered and a look of understanding appeared in his eyes. Only the shamans of the barbarian tribe could master the true 5 elemental spiritual powers of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. Priests like him could only cultivate various kinds of secondary spiritual powers, but their power was equally powerful. Thinking of this, he felt a little disgusted with the enemy hiding on the sand dune. This was to disrupt his plan to subdue the mountain spirit race. Even if the other side hadn't made a move yet, as long as they affected this area, they would become his enemy. Since it wasn't Lord Shaman, then there was nothing to be afraid of. This priest himself was an extremely talented rising star in the war god temple. If it wasn't for the fact that his background wasn't too good and he didn't have the backing of a powerful tribe, his achievements would have been much greater than what he was now. It was precisely because of this that he was even more eager to subdue a tribe for his own use. But in the barbarian wasteland, all the tribes insisted on a single belief in the power of the totem. Apart from worshipping their ancestors, the barbarian tribes only worshipped one kind of totem. For example, a tribe that worshipped a fire totem would never believe in the power of a water totem. The totem spiritual power of this priest belonged to the earth totem system of the 5 elements. He wanted to find a tribe that worshipped an earth power. Moreover, this tribe had already lost its priest, so the tribe couldn't be too weak. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to provide him with all kinds of strong support, and it would be useless to subdue it. Therefore, subduing the mountain spirit race was something he couldn't afford to fail. Originally, he had basically controlled the morale of the mountain spirit race. In today's battle against 4 small tribes, as long as he won the battle, the mountain spirit race would be completely loyal to him. Just as he was about to succeed, an accident had occurred. This time, he couldn't back down no matter what. The priest picked up his magic staff and started to chant a mysterious incantation. His body turned half a circle, no longer facing the front of the battlefield. Instead, he looked in the direction of the sand dune. The leaders of the mountain spirit race next to the priest soon noticed that something was wrong. They raised their heads and looked at the strange fire on the sand dune. Suddenly, their faces changed. However, seeing that the priest was calm and composed, and that he was directly attacking the sand dune, they felt relieved. In this battle, the high priest had already proven his strength. A yellow light rose up like a vast and boundless wasteland. It turned into a huge fist in midair, and then smashed down on the sand dune. Lu Chen, who was hiding behind the sand dune, had a helpless expression on his face. According to his original intention, he did not care whether the 2 barbarians fought to the death. It had nothing to do with him. Just as he was about to leave, who would have thought that the fire god's staff would do something like this? Although Lu Chen didn't know why the barbarian priest was so decisive and didn't even hesitate to attack them, it was obvious that the priest regarded them as an enemy. The fire god's staff emitted raging flames, and the body of the staff became hotter and hotter. It seemed to be very angry. Perhaps the priest thought that the other side was bold and dared to provoke him? But even if he did provoke him, there was nothing he could do. Lu Chen was helpless against the fire god's staff that could only be used as a torch for illumination. Seeing that the other party's powerful fist was about to smash down, in a moment of desperation, he could only channel the power of the black fire in his body into the fire god's staff. The black fire flashed in his eyes. Almost at the same time, the fire god's staff shone with a strange light. All the totem runes appeared at the same time, and a pure and powerful spiritual power gushed out. It was fire. Black fire. Lu Chen was so shocked that he couldn't speak for a moment. He had tried countless times in the ancient tree hole, but he couldn't activate the fire god's staff. He didn't expect that there would be a change when he used it today. As the black flames on the Vulcan's staff rose up, it immediately devoured all the original flames, turning them into dark flames. The entire sand dune seemed to darken in the blink of an eye. Then, a huge shadow appeared in mid-air, whistling as it flew. The giant fist of the barbarian priest smashed fiercely into the black shadow. But, it was immediately entangled by the black flames. Then, a terrifying scene occurred. The black flames started to corrode the giant fist from all directions. Then, the giant fist started to emit a low-pitched sound that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves. In the blink of an eye, the entire giant fist was corroded. The last bit of light tried to escape. But, it was engulfed by the sea of black shadows. It didn't even make a sound before it disappeared. In the distance, the barbarian priest's face suddenly turned pale. He spat out a mouthful of blood. His expression changed greatly, and his eyes were filled with disbelief and fear. At that moment, he seemed to have seen a ghost. He lost his composure and shouted, devil fire, this is the power of the black fire." His voice suddenly became hoarse. A moment later, a flame suddenly emerged from his throat. It burned crazily, and danced wildly in the black shadow. It burnt and melted his flesh. The priest screamed at the sky. He even threw away the staff in his hand. He covered his throat with both hands and fell to the ground. He started to struggle and twitch. The barbarians of the mountain spirit tribe were shocked. They were all dumbfounded. They didn't know what had happened. One of the more courageous barbarian leaders, out of respect for the priest, took the risk to help and extinguish the flames on the priest's body. But in an instant, the black flames spread from the priest's body to his own body. Ah! A shrill scream came from the mouth of the strong barbarian warrior. He was not afraid of bloodshed, but at this moment, he seemed to be suffering from an unimaginable pain. He fell to the ground, twisting and struggling with all his strength. The surrounding barbarians screamed again and again. They instantly retreated to the side, forming a large circle. They could only watch as the two people in the middle were burned to death by the strange and terrible black fire. In the end, only 2 charred skeletons were left. When the priest died in pain and madness, the stone puppet on the distant battlefield suddenly stopped moving. A moment later, this incomparably powerful killing machine seemed to have lost the support of its skeleton. All the stones and sand shattered, disintegrating into a large pile of scattered rubble, and collapsed with a loud bang. On the battlefield, there was a sudden silence. The barbarian warriors on both sides didn't seem to know what had happened. They looked at each other with their mouths agape. But then, a mournful scream came from the back of the mountain spirit tribe's camp. It resounded through the battlefield, and the situation suddenly changed. Countless mountain spirit tribe warriors looked back. They didn't know who shouted, "The priest is dead," but the crowd immediately fell into chaos. On the other hand, the morale of the allied soldiers of the few tribes was greatly boosted. A few of the leaders even seized the opportunity to roar out commands. A few of the warrior leaders even took the lead and charged into the battlefield, instantly setting off a furious counterattack. The mountain spirit tribe's side seemed to have fallen from the highest point. The whole formation trembled because of the priest's death. Then, it began to collapse. The result of relying too much on a powerful force was that when that force disappeared, they would be weaker and smaller than ordinary people. The tide of battle turned in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the front line of the mountain spirit tribe's warriors had fallen. Blood splattered everywhere. Everyone turned around and fled. Behind the crowd, someone from the allied tribes suddenly roared. "Fire God, the fire god has been reborn." Chapter 288. There was no turning back in that battle. The mountain spirit tribe's morale were completely shattered by the sudden death of the shaman. They were chased and slaughtered by the joint army of several tribes. Blood flowed all the way, and at least half of the mountain spirit tribe's warriors were killed, and they fled in panic. The mountain spirit tribe couldn't be ranked at the top among the barbarian tribes of the southern wilderness. Their overall strength was probably a little lower than the middle level. But after such a big battle, they had lost more than half of their elite warriors. It was a big blow to the mountain spirit tribe's strength. If they didn't have any more opportunities or powerful talents, they would inevitably fall into the ranks of the weak tribes. Different from the gloomy outlook of the defeated, the victors were full of excitement and joy. The armies of the few tribes chased after the mountain spirits for a long distance. The mountain spirits paid the price of more blood and human lives. After dying a bloody path, the armies of the few tribes returned triumphantly. Lu Chen, who was standing on the sand dune, wanted to leave before the fire god's staff quietened down. However, he soon discovered that he had been surrounded by the barbarian leaders and a portion of their subordinates. Lu Chen sighed and looked into the distance. He saw that the warriors in the distance were cleaning up the battlefield. There seemed to be 2 important things. The first was to check whether the fallen warriors were still alive. If they were comrades, they would help them back for treatment. If they were enemies of the mountain spirit tribe, they would smash their heads and stomp on their chests, so that they would die a more thorough death. For a time, the battlefield was once again filled with blood-curdling screams, accompanied by the maniacal laughter of the victorious barbarian warriors, turning the battlefield into a bloody scene. Other than that, they were probably looting. The so-called belongings were actually the belongings of the dead, such as weapons, accessories, and even clothes. Many warriors of the mountain spirit tribe were stripped naked after they died, and fell to the ground in shame and dignity. What was even more surprising was that the barbarian warriors of the other tribes, who had fought together in the bloody battle, were not only looting the dead warriors of the mountain spirit tribe, but also looting the dead warriors of the other tribes, as if they had gone mad from poverty. But in this way, disputes immediately arose. Everyone wanted to rob others, but their dead brothers absolutely could not be humiliated like this. So, there was an immediate uproar on the battlefield. For a moment, many people pulled out their weapons, and the atmosphere became somewhat tense. This had alarmed the few barbarian leaders who had come to the sand dune. Fortunately, these barbarian leaders still had some brains. They turned around and ran back, kicking, cursing, and yelling. Finally, they managed to restrain their subordinates. They separated most of the barbarian warriors and slowly returned to their own camps. However, they naturally wouldn't return the things that they had snatched from the barbarian leaders. In this way, the battlefield finally quieted down, leaving only a miserable and ugly scene. Most of the barbarians seemed to be used to this kind of situation. Although they were fighting fiercely just now, they seemed to have forgotten about this matter after a while. They were happily counting their spoils of war. Those who had a lot of spoils of war were laughing loudly, while those who had a little bit of spoils of war were dejected. Compared to these useless barbarian warriors, the barbarian chiefs ran back to the sand dune. It was only now that the Vulcan staff in Lu Chen's hand had completely calmed down. It no longer glowed or heated up, and the totem patterns had completely disappeared. It looked just like a smooth staff. How did a human feel when he was surrounded by a large group of barbarians in the southern border? Lu Chen felt that he had roughly understood. He looked at the barbarians who were slowly encircling him from both sides of the sand dune. He frowned slightly, and looked left and right from time to time, thinking about how to escape. And beside him, Atsu also seemed to feel the danger. His eyes revealed an ominous glint, and he bared his fangs. A low growl came from his throat, and he stared at the enemies who were encircling him from afar. After seeing the appearance of Lu Chen, who was standing at the highest point of the sand dune, all the barbarians subconsciously stopped in their tracks. Everyone's face revealed a look of astonishment, as if they had seen something unimaginable. After a moment, someone suddenly shouted, "Human race?" After this shout, the crowd of barbarians instantly burst into an uproar. Suddenly, there was a series of ping ping pang pang sounds. It was unknown how many people instantly pulled out their weapons. They roared angrily, and it seemed that they were about to rush over and hack Lu Chen to death. Lu Chen's pupils shrank slightly. He took a step back and placed a hand on Atu's back. Just as he was about to move, the fire god's staff in his hand, which had already calmed down, suddenly flashed. A beam of flame swayed. It did not have a strong aura, but it was very obvious that it swayed towards a certain direction in the crowd of barbarians. All the barbarians suddenly froze for a moment. Their faces revealed a look of astonishment and instinctive reverence, but it seemed that the hatred in their hearts was even greater. Moreover, they did not quite believe that a human could possess such a legendary power. Therefore, they still shouted loudly, and were about to rush over and tear Lu Chen into thousands of pieces. But at this moment, suddenly, a tribe leader in the crowd of barbarians roared fiercely. He took a few steps and rushed to the front, and suddenly ran in front of Lu Chen. Lu Chen's face was stern, and a black flame flashed in his eyes. When he was about to attack, he suddenly saw that the abnormally burly barbarian leader stared at him. Especially when he saw the black flame that flashed in Lu Chen's eyes, his entire face suddenly revealed an indescribable excitement. Roar! He suddenly roared, and turned around. He held a giant axe in his hand horizontally in front of him, and like a raging beast, he stood in front of Lu Chen. Stop! This roar was like a clap of thunder, instantly resounding through the entire hill. All the barbarians were stunned, and stopped in their tracks to look at the barbarian leader. Immediately, the barbarian leader waved his giant axe and roared, "Black Fire Warriors, come here." With this order, a group of barbarian warriors that looked incomparably valiant immediately responded. From the clothes and accessories on their bodies, these barbarian warriors were all from the same tribe. With a clatter, they all stood behind the barbarian leader. Facing more barbarian warriors around them, these barbarians of the Black Fire tribe did not have the slightest hesitation. They directly pulled out their weapons behind the leader, and looked fiercely at their surroundings. There was no doubt that as long as the leader of the Black Fire tribe gave the order, these warriors of the Black Fire tribe would not hesitate to fight to the death with this group of people who were their comrades not long ago. Huiyan, what are you doing? A shout came from the crowd, and a moment later, 3 people walked out. They all looked like the barbarian leaders. It was also at this time that the remaining barbarian warriors seemed to have a subtle atmosphere. They all retreated and gathered behind their leader, and then looked at the people of the other tribes around them with vigilance. Among the 3 barbarian leaders on the left, middle, and right, the one who shouted was the one on the left. Then, the eldest barbarian leader standing in the middle also shouted, Huiyan, we, the Black Fire, Thunder Lizard, Divine Wood, and Ghost Eye tribes, have joined hands to fight, and we are like brothers. Why are you suddenly pointing your blade at us? What do you mean? The barbarian leader called Huiyan, who stood in front of Lu Chen, had a cold expression. He was not moved by these words at all, and only said, this person has nothing to do with you, I want to take him away. What? The barbarian warriors in the 3 tribes suddenly became restless. The leader of the Thunder Lizard tribe, who was wearing a terrifying lizard head ornament on his head, scolded, are you blind? That's not a barbarian, that's a human. Yes, how many years has it been since a human came to the southern border? He must be a spy, we must kill him. Have you forgotten the humiliation our ancestors suffered in the north? How many great heroic souls lost their lives in that land? They were all killed by the human race. For a moment, the emotions of the tribes were stirred up, and curses came one after another. Even the warriors of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be puzzled and doubtful. Although they still stood firmly behind their leader, Huiyan, from time to time they would sneak glances at this leader who had suddenly become strange. Huiyan's face was still ferocious and solemn, and it seemed that he had no intention of backing down. He slashed the giant axe in his hand in the air, and with a low roar, he looked around and said, this is the power of the Black Fire, the sign of the resurrection of our fire god. His face was ferocious, and he glared at the 3 people in front of him. The killing intent in his eyes was not concealed, and he roared, whoever dares to touch him will have to step over the dead bodies of all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe. As soon as these words came out, the area under the sand dunes suddenly became silent. As for the warriors of the Black Fire tribe behind Huiyan, they all seemed to have come to a sudden realization. With a whoosh, they immediately surrounded Lu Chen and Black Wolf Atu. The sudden turn of events made Lu Chen a little stunned, and he couldn't come back to his senses for a while. While the warriors of the Black Fire tribe in front of him were prepared to fight to the death, many of them secretly looked back at him, as if they were full of curiosity towards Lu Chen. In front of the crowd, the leaders of the 3 tribes were also stunned. Soon, everyone remembered the scene that happened at the most intense moment of the battle. The rising flame power had obviously defeated the mountain spirit priest's earth spiritual power, killed the priest, and destroyed the terrifying stone puppet. This was the key to turning the tide of the battle. For a moment, everyone was silent, and many of the barbarian warriors showed a trace of awe on their faces, and even put down the weapons they had raised. But at this time, the leader of the Ghost Eye tribe, the only one among the 3 who hadn't spoken, suddenly said with a cold gaze, Huiyan, are you trying to take a priest back? Chapter 289. Snatch a priest back. Many of the barbarians who heard Huiyan's words did not understand. Their faces were filled with astonishment and confusion. But soon, the expressions of the 2 barbarian leaders who stood at the front changed drastically. Their gazes immediately landed on Lu Chen, who was standing behind Huiyan. In the southern wilderness, for every tribe, the people who mastered the power of witchcraft were the source of the tribe's prosperity. However, there were only a very small number of people who could perceive the incomparably chaotic spiritual power and use a special method to cultivate witchcraft. These people were known as priests. And among the priests, those who stood at the peak and were able to grasp the source of the spiritual energy of the southern territory were called shamans. Any tribe that lost a priest would not be able to maintain its prosperity. This was not only because of the weakening of the tribe's power, but also because the priest was often the wisest person in the tribe. For many years, shamans and priests had always guided the barbarian tribes of the southern wilderness. The barbarians believed in and worshipped witchcraft, and revered shamans and priests. Without the guidance of the priest, the tribe would eventually weaken, and they would fall into a predicament in the vast and harsh wilderness. Without the guidance of the priest's witchcraft and wisdom, the only thing they could rely on was the flesh and courage of the warriors in the tribe. However, these things were extremely fragile in the face of great power. A few years ago, the mountain spirit tribe was like the other 4 tribes. They didn't have a priest and struggled in the lower world of the wilderness. However, once they were influenced by a priest, the strength of the mountain spirit tribe rapidly expanded. Today, they could even fight against 4 people alone. The power of worship and belief of the Black Fire tribe had indeed appeared before. After the chief ghost I explained, the other 2 tribal chiefs immediately understood. But understanding was one thing, but they still looked at Lu Chen in disbelief. That was a human. In the long history of the southern wilderness, there had never been a non-barbarian priest or shaman. But, no one had ever said that the priest and shaman couldn't be a foreigner. A human was going to become a priest of the barbarian tribe? The few leaders and the barbarian warriors behind them, who were starting to understand the situation, even the barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe, all had their mouths wide open in shock. Lu Chen had also heard it himself. After understanding the meaning behind this matter, even though his temperament was much calmer than an ordinary person, he could not help but be greatly shocked. His gaze landed on the back of the abnormally tall and sturdy Huiyan. Obviously, this chief warrior of the Black Fire tribe had thought of all these in a short period of time. Then, he decided to use all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe to fight against the other 3 tribes without any hesitation. Even Lu Chen himself felt that it was a little inconceivable. At this moment, Huiyan, who was being stared at by everyone, had a serious expression on his face. However, his expression was firm and he had no intention of backing down. He only said in a low voice, "Whether he is a priest or not, I don't know. This is up to the Black Fire tribe's chief to decide." But what appeared just now was the power of the fire god of our Black Fire tribe. No matter what, I must bring this person back. Whether he lives or dies will be decided by the chief. The other 3 tribes looked at each other, and the chiefs frowned. At the same time, the barbarian warriors seemed to have unknowingly spread out, gradually surrounding the Black Fire tribe. Huiyan's expression became even colder. He stared at the 3 chiefs and shouted, "Do you really want to fight to the death with the Black Fire tribe?" The 3 barbarian chiefs also looked hesitant. They looked at each other, then walked together and began to discuss in low voices. Actually, based on their current strength, none of the tribes had any priests. With 3 tribes against 1, the Black Fire tribe would definitely have the upper hand. But if the Black Fire tribe fought to the death, the 3 tribes would inevitably suffer some additional losses. The life of every barbarian warrior was precious. Although they could fight to the death for the tribe, as a chief, they could not easily waste the lives of the warriors under them. Otherwise, the great ancestors of the tribe would curse them, and they would forever be despised by the tribe, and their souls would never be able to return to peace. While the other 3 tribes were discussing, the atmosphere between the barbarian warriors suddenly became even more tense. Although Huiyan's attitude seemed to be abnormally firm, in fact, his forehead and back were faintly covered in cold sweat. He only felt that his heart was abnormally heavy, as if there was a huge stone pressing down on it. Although the warriors of the Black Fire tribe would not question his decision, he himself had to think more. Was it really worth it for such a human? Cough, cough, cough. Just when the atmosphere was a little stiff, Huiyan suddenly heard a light cough coming from behind him. The sound sounded a little strange. Huiyan was startled for a moment. He turned around and saw that it was Lu Chen looking at him and giving him a look. Huiyan was silent for a moment, then quietly took 2 steps back and came to Lu Chen's side. His body was considered tall and burly among the barbarian warriors. At this moment, when Lu Chen stood beside him, he looked like a child who had just grown up. Huiyan lowered his voice, his expression slightly strange and complicated. He said in a low voice, "What do you want?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Tell them that as long as they let us go, they will hand over all the treasures that you have plundered." Hui Yan's expression suddenly changed, and a murderous aura instantly leaked out. He could not help but take a step towards Lu Chen. Some of the warriors of the Black Fire tribe who were closer also suddenly became furious. In an instant, several weapons were pointed at Lu Chen. It seemed that there was no need for the three tribes to do anything. Just based on what he said just now, the people of the Black Fire tribe couldn't wait to get rid of this fraud who might have the power of their tribe's fire god. Towards the murderous aura around him, Lu Chen did not seem to feel it. His eyes only stared at Hui Yan. After a moment, he said coldly, "You want the power of the priest, so you don't believe my words?" Hui Yan angrily growled, "These things were exchanged with the lives of my warriors. Why should I hand them over? You value this very much?" "Of course." "Do the three tribes value it?" "Of course." "Then you throw all these things to their warriors. If one tribe has more, another tribe has less, and one tribe doesn't give anything at all, what do you think the consequences will be?" Hui Yan was just about to angrily speak, but suddenly, his body fiercely shook. Immediately after, his eyes slowly widened. Looking at Lu Chen, a trace of shock and a complicated expression appeared in his eyes. That look, it was as if he had suddenly seen a ghost. Lu Chen sighed and softly said to Hui Yan, "Do you know what the priest's power is other than witchcraft?" Hui Yan was stunned for a moment, then suddenly turned around. His entire face seemed to be on fire, burning brightly. After letting out a low roar, he shouted to the surrounding warriors, "Hand over all the things that you have just plundered." Chapter 290. Ordering the Black Fire tribe's barbarian warriors to hand over their loot was like seeing a starving dog and ordering it to spit out the bones it had painstakingly snatched. Most of the barbarian warriors in the surroundings didn't move after hearing the shout of their leader. They all widened their eyes and looked at Hui Yan as if they were looking at a madman. At the same time, some of the Black Fire tribe's warriors looked at Hui Yan with hostility, but not at Hui Yan, who had gone through life and death with them. Instead, they looked at Lu Chen, the instigator of all this. They clenched their weapons tightly, looking as if they wanted to hack him to death. The barbarians were strong and fierce, and most of the warriors were simple-minded. Therefore, even when facing Hui Yan, they would show a bit of dissatisfaction. But no matter what, Hui Yan was still the chief. Seeing the expressions of the people around him, he also became angry. However, there was no such thing as tactful persuasion among the barbarians, so he directly chose the most common and most direct method. "Go to hell." The tall and fierce barbarian cursed loudly. He kicked a barbarian warrior who was standing closest to him. Then, he took a step forward, and used his huge palms to smash anyone he saw. If he didn't like them, he would kick them. Along the way, the barbarians were thrown off their feet. The barbarians roared and roared continuously. The other barbarians who didn't know what was going on were stunned, and looked at each other in dismay. Under the pressure of Hui Yan, all the Black Fire tribe's warriors seemed to have become listless. With sullen faces, they obediently handed over the loot they had just obtained. In the blink of an eye, there was a huge pile of loot on the ground. Lu Chen looked at this scene from the side. He had a whole new level of respect for Hui Yan. He could tell that this person should be a person of great prestige in the Black Fire tribe. So many fierce warriors actually didn't dare to make a sound in front of him. Not long after, almost all the loot from the Black Fire tribe was piled up on the ground. Hui Yan's expression didn't look too good. No matter what, these bones were his own. He didn't feel good about throwing them away. Normally, he wouldn't do this even if he was beaten to death. But at this moment, things were different. As the leader of the tribe, his vision was much better than those subordinates who only knew how to fight, rob, and roar. This mysterious human possessed the power of black flames. In that instant, Hui Yan felt as if he had been blessed by his ancestors. He firmly believed that he had not done anything wrong. "These things are for you. We have helped you in this battle for nothing. Let us go." Hui Yan stood in front of the pile of spoils of war. His expression was steely, and he seemed to be gnashing his teeth as he spoke. The three leaders on the opposite side were shocked. The other barbarian warriors in the surroundings also became restless. Their eyes were filled with greed. The southern wilderness was barren and harsh. It was a good thing to have something in one's hands, even if it was snatched from the hands of the dead. The three leaders didn't expect the Black Fire tribe to make such a big concession. It should be known that in all the tribal wars in the wilderness, the most important thing was to divide the spoils of war. Everyone fought and bled, just to get more food, weapons, and other useful things. Perhaps the top few powerful tribes didn't care about these small things because they occupied the best resources in the wilderness and had the support of the terrifying shamans. But at least for the middle and lower level tribes, the things that the Black Fire tribe threw out were the fundamental reason for them to start the war. Almost everyone was tempted. The only one who was still somewhat clear-headed was the leader of the Ghost Eye tribe. But before he could object, Hui Yan had already started to divide the spoils. He grabbed and threw the spoils of war directly into the crowd on the opposite side. Immediately, a large group of barbarian warriors started to fight for them. However, he didn't know if it was intentional or not, but most of the items he threw landed on the Thunder Lizard tribe, and a small portion landed on the Divine Wood tribe. As for the Ghost Eye tribe, they didn't even have a single item. Of course, this immediately aroused the dissatisfaction and public anger of the Ghost Eye tribe. Angry shouts immediately came out. The barbarian warriors of the Ghost Eye tribe looked at the excited faces of the people from the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Divine Wood tribe who got the spoils of war, and their eyes turned red. However, Hui Yan's actions were extremely fast. He quickly threw out the last of the items, then waved his hand and led the rest of the Black Fire tribe to surround Lu Chen and Atu as they retreated down the sand dune. At the same time, Hui Yan walked at the back, his eyes shining as he stared at those people as they slowly retreated. There was a commotion among the three tribes on the sand dune. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe cursed and was the first to rush out. But after a few steps, he suddenly stopped and looked back. He saw that the people of the other two tribes were still standing in the same place. The people of the Divine Wood tribe looked left and right. When they saw the Thunder Lizard tribe, there was envy in their eyes, but when they saw the Ghost Eye tribe, they suddenly felt a sense of superiority. After hesitating a few times, no one moved forward. As for the Thunder Lizard tribe, so many good things suddenly appeared on the ground. Originally, they had to bleed, sweat, and even risk their lives to get them. Only an idiot would follow the idiots of the Ghost Eye tribe and risk their lives. Therefore, a large group of people from the Thunder Lizard tribe were desperately fighting for the things on the ground. It looked like a group of dogs fighting for meat and bones. They didn't even look at the people of the Ghost Eye tribe. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe flew into a rage and cursed loudly. He looked back at the retreating people of the Black Fire tribe and the tall and fierce figure. After hesitating for a while, he finally sighed and didn't chase after them. If he chased after them now, without the help of the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Divine Wood tribe, it would be equivalent to the Ghost Eye tribe fighting against the Black Fire tribe. Not to mention the fact that the outcome was uncertain. Even if the Ghost Eye tribe won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. At that time, they would inexplicably lose the lives of more than half of the warriors of the tribe. If they couldn't destroy the Black Fire tribe, they would definitely have a blood feud with them. Most importantly, the Black Fire tribe had already King thrown out most of the things they had seized. Even if the Ghost Eye tribe won this battle, they wouldn't get many benefits. How could they fight this battle? No matter how they looked at it, they were at a disadvantage. There were many barbarians in the southern wilderness who risked their lives for revenge. But if the leader of a tribe was like that, his tribe would have been destroyed long ago. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe hadn't encountered such a depressing situation for a long time. He looked at the backs of the people of the Black Fire tribe gradually getting further and further away, and then looked at the two tribes behind him who were still gloating. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe looked up to the sky and sighed. "Priests, those are priests," he said with a sad face, "a bunch of idiots." Chapter 291. After safely leaving the sand dune and the battlefield, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe led Lu Chen and Atsu into the depths of the wilderness. Along the way, the atmosphere of the entire team was very stiff. Every time, there would be malicious gazes directed at Lu Chen, as if they wanted to devour this weak human. Lu Chen was relatively calm about this. Perhaps he was just hiding his true thoughts in his heart. However, Atsu's reaction was much more direct. He was very sensitive to the hostile gazes around him. Every time someone looked at him, he would grit his teeth and stare back angrily. He looked like he was about to devour someone. Strangely, despite Atsu's ferocious demeanor, the barbarian warriors were not angry at all. They looked at Lu Chen with disgust, but when they saw Atsu, their expressions changed. Most of them were actually appreciative. Some even pointed at Atsu and nodded, praising the ferocity of this black wolf. It could be considered as the best demon beast in the wilderness. It was a pity that the heavens were blind, and such a good beast had been taken in by a piece of trash. While saying such contemptuous words and glancing at the disdainful gazes, everyone revealed a look of regret and pain. This caused Lu Chen to be speechless as he quietly observed the situation around him, and at the same time secretly pondering how to escape. After walking for about 2 hours, the Black Fire tribe's team rested in a boxwood forest unique to the wilderness. This type of boxwood had a very strange appearance. At first glance, it looked very haggard, and the branches were also bare. At most, there were a few yellow leaves, and it looked like it was about to wither. But in fact, this kind of tree could survive in this desolate wilderness for thousands of years with this pitiful appearance. During this break, Huiyan and Lu Chen had a conversation. Huiyan asked about Lu Chen's background, and Lu Chen asked about where they were taking him. Huiyan was probably not used to conversing with Lu Chen in such a polite manner, especially since Lu Chen did not answer him honestly. Instead, he asked many questions in return. There were a few times when Lu Chen clearly felt that the burly and fierce barbarian had the urge to go berserk, roar, and punch and kick to increase his power. Judging from the way the surrounding barbarian warriors quietly retreated, Lu Chen's feelings seemed to be right. But for some unknown reason, Huiyan, this seemingly violent and ferocious barbarian, actually managed to suppress his violent temper in this first formal conversation with Lu Chen. Not only did he not touch a single hair on Lu Chen's head, he even answered all of Lu Chen's questions. From this, Lu Chen learned that the Black Fire tribe was indeed a great tribe with a glorious history. In the vast wasteland of the southern border, among the countless barbarian tribes, only 7 of the strongest tribes had ever produced a supreme expert like the shaman. Without exception, all of them had mastered the most powerful source of power in the southern barbarian witchcraft. And the Black Fire tribe was one of them. The shaman that once appeared in the Black Fire tribe was respectfully called the Fire Shaman. When Lu Chen heard the words, Fire Shaman, his heart was filled with an indescribable feeling of absurdity. It was as if he suddenly saw fate smiling evilly at him. However, his many years as a shadow allowed him to hide this strange and indescribable feeling in his heart, not revealing it. And when Huiyan asked him about his origins, Lu Chen did not hesitate too much. He very naturally and smoothly told the barbarian leader that he was adventuring in the disorienting lands a few days ago, and accidentally found a dilapidated village in the depths of the disorienting lands. Of course, there was a barbarian village inside, and he coincidentally obtained the Vulcan's staff at that time. When Lu Chen said this, he also recalled the layout of the village to Huiyan, as well as some of the totems and patterns that he remembered being drawn all over the village. When he heard this, Huiyan was so excited that he could not help but stand up. Not only him, but the surrounding warriors also gathered around, their faces filled with disbelief. Some of them were so excited that their bodies were trembling slightly. Unfortunately, Lu Chen did not give these barbarian warriors too much hope. He very definitely told them that everyone in the village had died. And in a moment of compassion, he took care of and fed the dying old shaman a few mouthfuls of water. The old shaman gave him half a wooden staff and said that it was called the Vulcan's staff. He asked him to bring it back to the southern wilderness and return it to the Vulcan. Halfway through his speech, Yan, and the surrounding barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe were so excited that they could not control themselves. The original suspicion on their faces had disappeared in an instant. When they heard Lu Chen's words, especially when they heard that the old shaman still struggled to urge Lu Chen to bring the Vulcan staff back to the wilderness, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe all burst into tears. Some growled, some roared, some wailed, and some even pounded their chests, kneeled on the ground, banging their heads on the ground. They did not even realize that they were bleeding. The onlookers were all trembling, as if they had committed a grave mistake and could not control themselves. Among the crowd, even Yan, who seemed to be the calmest and most composed, had tears in his eyes. His body trembled as he slowly turned to face the north. Looking at the endless land and the vast sky, he knelt on the ground with a thud and pounded his hands on the ground. He mumbled incomprehensibly, choking with sobs. Looking at the large group of barbarian warriors who were behaving strangely and weeping, Lu Chen was once again speechless. Although he did not know the history of the Black Fire tribe, but from the looks of it, it was clear that the small barbarian village that was destroyed was inextricably linked to the Black Fire tribe. As for why these barbarians were so agitated, he did not know. After a long while, the surrounding barbarian warriors slowly returned to normal. But many of them still had expressions of sadness and pain on their faces, and their eyes were red. But to be honest, with the ferocious appearance of the barbarians, at this moment, they did not look sad at all. Instead, they looked even more ferocious, like beasts with red eyes after being angered. After this torment, not only Yan, but even the barbarian warriors who originally hated Lu Chen looked at Lu Chen with much friendlier eyes. There was no longer so much hostility, as if the distance between them had suddenly been shortened. But compared to the other simple-minded Black Fire tribe warriors, Yan, the leader, was obviously more intelligent. In his excitement, he still remembered to ask Lu Chen, for thousands of years, no human has been able to cross the land of chaos to reach the southern wilderness. So, how did you get here? This question was not easy to answer. He definitely could not tell the truth. That seed was Lu Chen's biggest secret. Therefore, Lu Chen could only make up a story. He only said that after burying the old priest, he left the village. Not long after, he was chased by ferocious beasts and fell into the terrifying Dragon River. In the middle of it, he encountered an even more ferocious and unimaginably terrifying giant beast in the river, and was knocked unconscious. He thought that he would definitely die, but before he fainted, he vaguely felt that half of the fire god's staff suddenly lit up, and a mysterious light enveloped his whole body. After that, he did not know. When he woke up, he was already in the southern wilderness. What happened next was that he accidentally saw the battle between the four tribes. There were many flaws in this story, but to the Black Fire tribe, it was surprisingly effective. They almost immediately believed it without a doubt. With Yan as the leader, the barbarian warriors immediately knelt down, and then made a strange but solemn salute to the sky, loudly praising the supreme glory and power of the fire god. Lu Chen stood at the side and silently looked at this tribe that believed in the fire god. Suddenly, he thought of the fanatics of the Three Realms demonic cult that he had seen in the vast land of the Divine Land. Although the races were different and the things that they believed in were completely different, at this moment, in Lu Chen's mind, their figures actually overlapped. In this life, Lu Chen had never believed in any gods. If he did not have such an unwavering belief, he would have long collapsed in the demonic cult. At this moment, he naturally had no respect for the so-called fire god. He just subconsciously felt that it was a little strange. At the same time, since he came to the southern wilderness, it seemed that everything was too coincidental. After getting the fire god's staff, he encountered a tribe that had the inheritance of the Black Fire tribe. If it were not for his strong will, if it were someone else, they might really suspect that all this was arranged by that god. For the rest of the journey, many warriors of the Black Fire tribe were much more polite to Lu Chen. They no longer looked at him with hostility. Instead, they often looked at him with reverence. Lu Chen knew why, because he often saw the barbarian warriors looking at the fire god's staff in his hand with the same kind of gaze. That should be the artifact that belonged to the fire god, right? Hui Yan once asked him to check the fire god's staff, and Lu Chen gave it to him. Hui Yan took it carefully, and after rubbing it repeatedly, it could be seen that he wanted to use his own power to activate the fire god's staff, so that it would show the powerful black fire god's miracle. But unfortunately, the fire god seemed to ignore him, and the fire god's staff did not respond. At this moment, Hui Yan seemed to have suddenly become smarter. He actually shamelessly called all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe together and tried it out one by one. The Black Fire tribe was the tribe that admired the fire god the most. They were the direct descendants of the fire god's power, so there would definitely be people that were favored by the fire god. No one said anything about this. However, in this subtle atmosphere, if there really was someone who was favored by the fire god, that humans seemed to be dispensable after completing the mission of returning the fire god. Chapter 292. Gods were aloof, temperamental, unpredictable, mysterious, and ethereal. For so many years, gods that almost no one had ever seen were said to have the greatest requirement for their worshippers to be obedient. As long as they were obedient, there was no need to guess the actions of the gods. Because you would never guess. For example, the fire god was an ancient god that only the Black Fire tribe worshipped. All of his worshippers were in this tribe, while the human race was thousands of miles away. But at this critical moment, the fire god seemed to have abandoned his most loyal worshippers. The fire god's staff did not react to any of the barbarian warriors of the fire god tribe, even if they used all kinds of methods, including the methods passed down from ancient times. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe were all gritting their teeth and sweating profusely, but in the end, they did not succeed. Lu Chen stood at the side and looked at this scene coldly. For a moment, he was puzzled. In his hand, the fire god's staff would only react when he used the power of the black fire. This was probably because the two came from the same source. However, that was the extent of his understanding of the fire god's staff. Looking at the sorry state of the Black Fire tribe warriors, he started to have more doubts about the fire god. A god didn't believe in his own believers and people, and instead favored an unrelated person? This matter really didn't make sense no matter how he explained it. After a while, Hui Yan walked over awkwardly and returned the fire god's staff to Lu Chen. Lu Chen thought for a moment, but did not take it. Instead, he said to him, "You should be able to tell that I am not a priest." Hui Yan was startled, and his face turned serious. He said in a low voice, "Why?" Lu Chen pointed at the fire god's staff and said, "If this fire god's staff is a treasure of your tribe, then you can take it back. There is no need to give it to me." Hui Yan didn't expect Lu Chen to say this and was momentarily stunned. He heard Lu Chen continue, "I've already told you what happened before. Although I don't know why the fire god you mentioned chose me, since I've returned the fire god's staff to you, I think I've completed my mission." He looked at Hui Yan and calmly said, "Take this treasure back." "I don't want it." "Then, I'll leave this place myself." "What do you think?" Hui Yan's expression changed. Some of the barbarian warriors nearby who heard their conversation were also stunned. However, after pondering silently for a moment, Hui Yan looked around at the barbarian warriors and shook his head. He stuffed the fire god's staff into Lu Chen's hands and said, "This won't do. Since the fire god has chosen you, he must have his reasons." As he spoke, he turned to the surrounding black fire warriors and said loudly, "I've thought about it. The reason why we were unable to reignite the fire god's staff is because we committed a huge mistake in the past. The fire god still wants to punish us." "Who?" There was a commotion among the warriors, but when Lu Chen looked over, many of them had a look of sudden understanding and nodded their heads, as if they had been woken up by Hui Yan's words. Then, when they looked at Lu Chen's side again, their faces were filled with respect. It really seemed like they were looking at a priest. Lu Chen felt somewhat helpless. Just as he was about to say something, Hui Yan had already turned around and pulled Lu Chen back without batting an eyelid. Lu Chen understood and followed him to a secluded area where there were fewer people. Hui Yan said in a low voice, "Lu Chen, I don't care about your background or identity. But you can clearly see the current situation. Since you're here, follow me back to the tribe. At the very least, you have to meet our tribe leader. When that time comes, we'll listen to the tribe leader's decision. Tribe leader? Lu Chen frowned. Hui Yan nodded his head in response. Then, he slowed down and said in a low voice, "You're after all a human, not a barbarian. In this southern wilderness, only our Black Fire tribe has no enmity towards you and can protect you a little. If you leave, once people from other tribes see you, there will immediately be a bloodbath. Unless you leave the wilderness, otherwise, there will be no end." He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Even if you have some ability, but if this goes on, there will be a day when you can't hold on." Lu Chen was silent, but in his heart, he had to admit that this seemingly rough and fierce barbarian's words were indeed very reasonable. The way back was blocked by the Great Snow Mountain and the abyss of primal chaos. The great river of the Dragon River was even more dangerous. With his current ability, it was impossible for him to cross it. Not to mention that apart from the strange black fire in his body, his original Dao techniques and divine arts were almost completely crippled due to the chaos of the 5 elemental spiritual energies. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, Lu Chen sighed and nodded, "All right." The Black Fire tribe's location was not too far from them. They arrived at the tribe's location in the evening. Under the dim night sky, Lu Chen saw from afar that the Black Fire tribe's camp was actually built on flat ground without any cover. There were some stones piled up around it as a wall, which could barely be considered as a defense. But looking at the height of the stone wall, it was estimated that it could only defend against some small beasts passing by in the wilderness. If there were really enemies, it would be useless. They could only rely on the tribe's warriors to fight with their flesh and blood. It was probably because of this that the elite warriors of the Black Fire tribe didn't dare to leave their tribe too far. The battlefield couldn't be more than a day's journey away from their tribe. They were afraid that if something happened to the tribe, it would be too late for them to rush back. Probably hearing the movements of the Black Fire tribe's warriors returning, there was a sudden commotion in the originally quiet Black Fire tribe. Then, many barbarians ran out and welcomed them. Suddenly, there were cheers and shouts at the entrance of the camp. Many women and children who stayed behind to guard the camp finally saw the people they wanted to see after being on tenterhooks for a long time. For a moment, there were all kinds of hugs and laughter, showing that even the fierce and barbaric barbarians had a human side. In this process, Lu Chen suddenly realized something that he had neglected before. Everyone was smiling. Until he walked into the camp, he did not see anyone crying or wailing in sorrow. At most, there were people who were injured and were asked about their well-being. This meant that in that fierce battle, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe seemed to have not suffered any losses, and actually managed to escape unscathed. For a moment, Lu Chen could not help but look at the tribal warriors in a new light. At that time, he hid on the hill and watched the battle below. The tragic scene was still fresh in his memory. Now, it seemed that although the Black Fire tribe seemed to be in a difficult and unfavorable situation, to be able to struggle and survive in such a harsh wasteland, they had their own unique qualities. While Lu Chen was secretly observing these barbarians, the people of the Black Fire tribe also began to notice that there was suddenly a stranger with a strange appearance among the returning troops. His appearance was very different from that of a barbarian. Very soon, someone thought of the legendary human race of the north, and immediately, someone cried out in surprise. This cry alarmed even more people. In a moment, many barbarians of the Black Fire tribe surrounded him. Most of them were women and children. The women were very cautious and kept a distance from Lu Chen, but the barbarian children were unscrupulous. Many of them came closer to look at Lu Chen, shouting excitedly. Some of the bolder ones even stretched out their legs to kick him. It seemed that the education of the Black Fire tribe was very bad for the human race. There were even some who pulled out palm-sized knives and stabbed at him while screaming. This behavior immediately shocked the barbarian warriors who escorted Lu Chen back. Although Lu Chen was a human, the fire god liked him. In an instant, more than a dozen barbarian warriors surrounded them, scolding and scolding, chasing away those reckless brats. Among them, the most conspicuous one was Huiyan's tall and sturdy body. The leader of the barbarian warriors jumped over and directly grabbed the tallest and strongest child, who was also the only one who pulled out a knife and was about to stab someone. He slapped the child to the ground, then grabbed one of the child's legs and lifted him up. The child was not afraid of him, and was still struggling in midair. He held the knife and waved it at Lu Chen, shouting, "Let me go, let me chop off his head and put it on the roof of father's house." Huiyan's face darkened as he cursed. He stretched out his hand and tossed the little boy away. The child fell to the ground and rolled a few times, but his skin was surprisingly sturdy. He flipped over and jumped up again, still cursing and shouting, "Father, why didn't you let me kill him? Isn't he a human?" "Shut up." Huiyan scolded, then signaled Lu Chen to follow him. Lu Chen and Atsu followed behind him, walking deeper into the tribe. At this moment, when everyone saw this scene, they naturally knew that Lu Chen's identity was somewhat different from others, so they did not say anything. Only the child still looked very fierce, staring at Lu Chen with an unconvinced expression. When they walked past the child, Lu Chen glanced at him, and saw that the child was still trying his best to show a fierce expression, glaring at him fiercely. He could not help but laugh, and said to Huiyan, "Your son?" Huiyan coughed and said, an idiot." The child was furious, but did not dare to get angry at his father. Instead, he pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, "I'm not an idiot, let me fight him one-on-one. Watch me chop off his head and put it on father's, shut up." Huiyan's nose was almost crooked from anger, and he said angrily, "The others are all fine, only you keep shouting, what are you doing?" At this moment, they came to the front of a large stone house, and a slightly hunched figure walked out from the dark house. The child immediately seemed to have met his savior, jumping over and grabbing that person's hand, shouting, "Grandpa, Grandpa, look at father, he won't let me kill this hateful human." Chapter 293. Lu Chen raised his eyes and looked at the old man. At first glance, he felt that he looked somewhat familiar. Of course, it was absolutely impossible for him to have met this old barbarian who had spent his entire life in the southern wilderness. After carefully sizing him up for a moment, Lu Chen knew where that strange feeling came from. From the outline of his face, the old barbarian's facial features were somewhat similar to Huiyan's. However, Huiyan was in the prime of his life, and his energy, qi, and spirit were all at their peak, giving off a ferocious and valiant aura. On the other hand, it was hard to tell the age of this old barbarian, but he was obviously very old. Not only was his body hunched, his face was also lethargic, and a few large age spots had appeared on his thin face, making him look somewhat gloomy. Other than making people think that these two should be father and son, Lu Chen also thought of another barbarian. It was the one that he and Xian had seen in the Demon Flower Valley at the periphery of the disorienting lands. He was the cruel and vicious old barbarian who had been banished by the tribe because of his old age. It was probably because both of them were very old, and in the eyes of humans, barbarians all looked the same and were equally fierce. However, the old barbarian who was killed by Lu Chen was killed because the environment in the disorienting lands was too harsh, causing the tribe there to adopt the terrifying practice of banishing the elderly. Although the southern wilderness also looked desolate, the conditions here were obviously much better than in the disorienting lands. At least when Lu Chen walked into the camp of the Black Fire tribe, he saw many old barbarians. However, when the old barbarian looked at Lu Chen and heard Huiyan call him father, and the other barbarian warrior saluted him and called him chief, Lu Chen suddenly frowned. The old chief of the Black Fire tribe had a very heavy aura of lethargy. Even the dying old priest of the barbarian tribe in the disorienting lands looked more spirited than him. Human. Although the old barbarian looked very old, when his grandson grabbed his hand, he still showed a happy and gratified smile. However, after listening to the boy's complaint, the old barbarian raised his head and looked at Lu Chen. His expression immediately changed, and a look of shock appeared on his face as he let out a cry. Huiyan, who was at the side, walked forward and whispered a few words into the old tribe leader's ear. The old barbarian was startled for a moment, but it seemed that he valued Huiyan's son very much. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded and agreed. After that, the old barbarian turned around and walked back to his stone house. Hui Yan waved his hand at Lu Chen, indicating for him to enter with him. Lu Chen nodded his head and followed behind. Atsu followed behind him, but at the entrance, Hui Yan glanced at the gigantic black wolf demonic beast and said to Lu Chen, "Let it wait outside." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but still agreed. He rubbed Atsu's head and said, "Wait for me at the entrance, I'll come out in a moment." Atsu glanced at him, wagged its tail, and squatted down at the entrance. Then, Lu Chen and Hui Yan walked in. As soon as the figures of these people disappeared, the atmosphere in the Black Fire tribe became much more relaxed. Some of the relatives who had reunited with each other returned home, some stood together and laughed. Most of the children in the tribe were running around, showing a little bit of a happy atmosphere. Atsu looked at this unfamiliar place in boredom. Suddenly, a figure flashed in front of it. It was the boy who had spoken the loudest just now, Hui Yan's son. He stood in front of it with a scrutinizing look on his face. He looked at this gigantic demonic beast, which was rarely seen in the wilderness, with a hint of curiosity and passion in his eyes. Atu snorted and barked a few times. He lifted his head warily and looked at the young berserker. After entering the stone house, Lu Chen looked around and found that the furnishings in the house were extremely simple. There was a wooden bed, a stone cabinet, and a piece of animal skin. That seemed to be all. In the middle of the house, there was a pit. There were a few charcoal fires burning in the pit, and 3 wooden supports were propped up on top of it. A black clay pot hung from it. From time to time, there would be a crackling sound coming from the pot. It was unknown what was being burned. This was the place where the tribe leader lived, but it was already so simple. It was easy to imagine the situation in other places. It seemed that the Black Fire tribe was not in a good situation. However, neither the old barbarian tribe leader nor Hui Yan had any reaction to this. They were probably used to it. After entering the house, the old tribe leader sat down at one end of the fire pit. Hui Yan let Lu Chen sit on the other side, and then he knelt down beside the old tribe leader. He began to tell the tribe leader, who was also his father, in detail about the beginning and process of this matter. During this time, he even motioned to Lu Chen and asked for the fire god's staff, handing it over to the old tribe leader for him to see. Lu Chen was silent, but his eyes were secretly observing the 2 barbarians. From their conversation, he found out that the old tribe leader was called Fire Tiger. An old and ferocious tiger. As the old Fire Tiger listened to his son Hui Yan's narration, his gaze occasionally swept past Lu Chen's face, and then looked at the fire god's staff in his hand. At this time, it was difficult to see any special emotions in his expression. Apart from the reverence that came from the bottom of his heart, there was also a reverence towards the legendary fire god. As Hui Yan continued to narrate, there was a faint trace of excitement on his face. This was because he had already begun to talk about the most important matter. He believed that Lu Chen was favored by the fire god, and that the fire god must have bestowed a gift to the Black Fire tribe. Therefore, he was the priest that the Black Fire tribe had dreamed of for many years. As long as they had a priest, the Black Fire tribe that had been weak for many years would have hoped to rise again. At this point, Hui Yan's voice even began to tremble. It was obvious that to him, this goal was the most important matter that he had thought about day and night. Compared to the excitement of his young and strong son, Hui Yan's expression was much calmer than his gratitude towards the fire god's gift. Perhaps it was because he had lived for a long time, but his thoughts were heavier. When he looked at Lu Chen, there was a heavy suspicion in his eyes. Lu Chen could see this, but it didn't matter. He had never really thought of becoming this priest of the Black Fire tribe. He wouldn't do it, and he didn't want to do it. At this moment, Lu Chen couldn't wait for the Fire Tiger tribe leader to give the order to chase him out. This way, everyone would have less trouble. When Hui Yan finally finished telling his father about the course of events and his lofty aspirations, the aged Fire Tiger pondered silently for a long time. He did not agree, nor did he object. Instead, he suddenly opened his mouth to ask Lu Chen, "Do you have anything to say?" Lu Chen glanced at him and sneered in his heart, but his expression did not change. He calmly said, "I have already told Hui Yan what I wanted to say. First, it was an accident that I came to the southern wilderness. I never thought of bringing the fire god staff here. Second, I have no intention of being a priest in the Black Fire tribe. As long as you allow me, I can leave now." He paused for a moment before continuing, "This fire god staff isn't of much use to me. If it really is an important treasure of the Black Fire tribe, I can keep it and give it to you." Originally, Flaming Tiger's expression was somewhat gloomy and tense. However, when he heard Lu Chen's last sentence, he was startled for a moment. Immediately after, his expression eased up a little. But Hui Yan, who was sitting beside him, was somewhat anxious. He said in a low voice, "Lu Chen, don't talk nonsense. All the coincidences that you came here were all arranged by the fire god. Moreover, apart from you, no one else can activate the power of the fire god's staff. All of this must be the fire god's decision to let you be our Black Fire tribe's priest." Lu Chen was somewhat speechless. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Looking at Hui Yan's serious expression, he didn't know what to say for a moment. Hui Yan also frowned. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head again. Using his withered palm, he gently stroked the fire god's staff. There was hesitation and contemplation on his face. Hui Yan, who was at the side, saw that his father seemed to be wavering. He immediately became somewhat anxious. Just as he was about to urgently persuade him again, suddenly, at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the stone house. A roar was heard, followed by a series of exclamations from near and far. There was also a somewhat shrill scream mixed together. The three people in the stone house were all startled. Each of them had heard a familiar voice. The shrill scream belonged to Hui Yan's son, and the low and angry roar belonged to Atsu. As for the other cries of alarm, they belonged to the surrounding barbarians of the Black Fire tribe. Hui Yan and Lu Chen immediately stood up from the ground. After looking at each other, they immediately strode outside. While Hui Yan was also shocked, he followed them out of the house. Once outside, a horrifying scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Not far from the stone house, a huge black wolf was roaring and pouncing on the barbarian youth. At this moment, two of Atsu's huge front claws were pressed on the youth's shoulders. A terrifying bloody mouth with incomparably sharp, blade-like fangs had already stretched out towards the youth's throat. The youth was already so scared that his face had turned pale. His whole body was trembling slightly, but he seemed to still have some of the innate valiance of the barbarians. Surprisingly, he did not cry. Instead, he clenched his teeth and struggled with all his might. But under the suppression of this huge monster, it was completely useless. The surrounding barbarians turned pale with fright. Many warriors immediately pulled out their weapons, but they did not dare to approach. They were afraid that if they were not careful, they would accidentally anger this monster. The consequences would be unimaginable. Lu Chen's face slightly darkened, but he still rushed over and shouted, "Atsu, don't be reckless." Atsu turned its head and saw that it was Lu Chen. Its eyes slightly softened, but it still growled in a low voice. It seemed to be very angry. Hui Yan stood behind Lu Chen. His face was a little anxious, but he did not dare to act rashly. He could only watch as Lu Chen held Atsu's head and slowly comforted it. When Atsu calmed down, Hui Yan's face regained some calmness. He said in a low voice, "Let go of the child first." Chapter 294. Lu Chen glanced at him, then nodded. He held Atsu's head in his arms, hugged it tightly, and then slowly pulled it back. Atsu let out a low growl, seemingly unwilling, but seeing that Lu Chen's expression was especially resolute, it hesitated for a moment, then finally followed Lu Chen's lead and slowly retreated. Even its front paws slowly left the youth's shoulder. The surrounding Black Fire tribe members all widened their eyes, their expressions nervous. The youth didn't even dare to breathe loudly, afraid that he would suddenly startle this huge beast, and in the blink of an eye, it would be a bloody disaster. Seeing the huge black wolf slowly retreat a few feet under Lu Chen's advice, Hui Yan, who had been waiting on the side for a long time, suddenly rushed forward and pulled the youth up from the ground. Then, with a clean and neat roll, in the blink of an eye, they were already several feet away from the huge black wolf. The surrounding Black Fire tribe members immediately let out a cry of relief. Then, 7 or 8 warriors immediately held their swords and stood between the two sides, fiercely looking at Lu Chen and Atsu. Lu Chen frowned, but didn't say anything. On the other side, Hui Yan pulled the youth up, and the chief Hua who also came over. The two looked at the boy with concern, and asked in unison, "Huaying, are you all right?" The barbarian youth called Huaying suddenly jumped up from the ground. The original fear on his face disappeared, and was replaced with shame and anger. He pointed at Atsu and shouted, "Dad, kill it, kill it." Lu Chen's expression suddenly darkened, and Hui Yan frowned. Before he could say anything, Huaying had already run to Huahu's side, grabbed his hand, and shouted, "Grandpa, this black wolf wants to kill me, it wants to kill me. I definitely won't let it go, kill it. Ever since it entered the Black Fire tribe, it didn't provoke anyone but you?" The one who spoke was Lu Chen. His eyes were cold as he asked. Hui Yan frowned. He turned around to look at his son and asked, "What happened when we entered the house?" The fire hawk froze for a moment, then shook its head with a resolute expression, shouting, "I just saw that this black wolf looks pretty good, and I somewhat like it. I wanted to take it as a mount, but I didn't do anything else. Who knew that this beast would be so ferocious and almost killed me?" "If it wanted to kill you, you would be a dead man by now," Lu Chen said coldly. The fire hawk was speechless for a moment, and then he flew into a rage. He pointed at Lu Chen and roared, "You lowly human, how dare you speak to me like this? Kill him, kill him." As he spoke, he shouted at the barbarian warriors around him, as if he was used to ordering others around. The strong barbarian warriors standing at the side looked at each other. Most of them didn't move, but secretly glanced at Hui Yan and Huahu. Only 1 or 2 tall and simple-minded men let out a roar, drew their blades, and ran out. "Stop!" A shout came from Hui Yan, stopping the two. Then, he looked to the side with a dark face, at the other people of the Black Fire tribe, and said loudly, "Did you all see what happened just now? Was it just like what the Fire Hawk said?" The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe that he looked at, whether they were the warriors, the old, the weak, the women, or the children, none of them responded. Some of them even looked a little embarrassed. Hui Yan's face darkened even more. He pointed at a tall barbarian warrior with especially thick arms, and shouted, "Tai Xiong, you speak." The warrior called Tai Xiong rolled his eyes, looked at the Fire Hawk, then looked at Hui Yan, and said in a muffled voice, "It was Little Hawk who liked this black wolf and wanted to tame it. But the black wolf was too wild and refused. Little Hawk used the method we usually use to deal with wild wolves. He used a knife to stab it, but he was careless and was knocked down by the wolf." Hui Yan was furious. He turned to the Fire Hawk and scolded, "This black wolf has an owner, why did you touch it?" The Fire Hawk was a little scared after being scolded by Hui Yan. He shrank back a little, but an old hand reached out and hugged him, patting his shoulder comfortingly. It was his grandfather, Huahu. Hui Yan leaned on his grandfather, and his courage grew a lot. He straightened his neck and shouted, "That's just a lowly human. Sooner or later, we will kill him. Also, such a good black wolf is rare in the entire wasteland. Of course, we will take it into our tribe. If we can tame it in the future, it will be a great help to us." Nonsense. Hui Yan was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He took 2 steps forward and was about to slap him. But at this time, Huahu frowned and suddenly stretched out his hand to stop him. He then said indifferently, "Little Hawk is doing this for the good of the tribe. Isn't it just a demonic beast? It's no big deal." Hui Yan was startled and said in shock, "Father, this is Lu Chen's black wolf. And what Little Hawk is doing is wrong, how can he? Enough. Hua Hu waved his hand and interrupted his son's words. His gaze turned to Lu Chen, who was standing side by side with the huge black wolf. A trace of haze flashed in the depths of his eyes. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "You can leave." "Father." "Grandfather." "Patriarch," several voices cried out at the same time, all of them filled with surprise. The only difference was that Hui Yan and the others had murderous looks on their faces, while Hui Yan was anxious. He hurriedly said to Hua Hu, "Father, have you forgotten what I said to you just now? This is very likely the will of the fire god. It is the fire god who has once again given our Black Fire tribe an opportunity, giving us a chance to rise and become strong again." "Just him?" This voice was a little immature and resentful. It was the teenager Hui Yan who interrupted. Obviously, he was still brooding over the humiliation he had just received. Lu Chen glanced at the teenager and smiled coldly, not saying a word. Hui Yan's anger rose and he shouted at Hui Yan, "Shut up." Then, he turned his head to Hua Hua, lowered his voice, and earnestly said, "Father, don't you know how big the difference is between the tribes in the wasteland and whether they have priests or not? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, we must not miss it." The expression on Hua Hu's withered and old face fluctuated. In the end, he still shook his head and said with a cold expression, "Lu Chen, you are originally a human. According to reason, if a person like you comes to our tribe, killing you is already giving you satisfaction. But for the sake of the fire god's staff, we will let you go. You can go." Lu Chen replied with an, "Oh," and said, "Then I thank you very much." Hua Hu's face darkened. It seemed that he was very unhappy with Lu Chen's attitude of not thanking him and not kneeling down with his tail between his legs. However, he still endured it and coldly laughed dryly, saying, "As for the fire god's staff, it is a divine weapon of our Black Fire tribe. It will stay with us." After saying this, he waved his hand and raised his voice, shouting, "Drive him out of the camp." Seeing his grandfather stand up for him and resolutely reject his father's unreliable suggestion, ordering him to chase this hateful human out of the tribe, Fire Eagle almost jumped up in joy. Although he was a little regretful that he could not kill this hateful human in front of everyone, he could still vent his anger. Hua Ying waved his fist and followed Hua Hu's shout, "Drive him out, drive him out. If this person dares to resist, kill him for me." Hua Hu, the chief of the Black Fire tribe, who was standing next to him, suddenly froze, and his voice came to an abrupt halt. Hua Hu, the chief of the Black Fire tribe, who was standing next to him, suddenly turned ashen. All the barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe, those fierce and valiant men who seemed to be able to fight a demon beast on their own, actually did not stand up at this moment. Almost everyone stood in place, including the two people who wanted to rush out to vent Hui Ying's anger. The eyes of every tribal warrior were secretly looking at Hui Yan. The atmosphere of the entire Black Fire tribe instantly became cold and silent. Except for Hui Yan, almost all the barbarians' faces changed slightly, whether it was the warriors or the old, weak, women and children who were watching from the side. This was a scene that had never happened in the Black Fire tribe before. In the past, Hua Hu and Hui Yan were father and son. One was the chief, while the other was the chief of the warriors. Hui Yan was almost naturally recognized as the future chief. Everything seemed to come naturally, and everything seemed so smooth and natural. Until today, on this seemingly normal day, because of the sudden appearance of the human, the conflict between the father and son was suddenly placed in front of all the people of the Black Fire tribe. Then, the situation suddenly changed in an unexpected and strange way. All the warriors, even without any orders, all looked at Hui Yan in unison, even if the chief, Hua Hu, had publicly issued an order. Hui Yan seemed to feel nothing, coldly standing in the middle of the tribe's camp, not saying a word. He did not move, and all the warriors looked at each other. Surprisingly, no one moved. The atmosphere slowly became tense. Who knew how many people's heartbeats slowly sped up? Fire Eagle tightly grabbed his grandfather Fire Tiger's palm. He felt his heart suddenly beat so fast that it was frightening, thumping non-stop. At the same time, he suddenly felt that his grandfather's hand was as cold as ice. He secretly looked at his grandfather, only to see that this old man, who had been the chief of the Black Fire tribe for many years, was slowly looking around with an ashen face. His gaze swept across the faces of the Black Fire warriors. Every time he saw a Black Fire warrior, that person's gaze would be averted. Perhaps it was because of guilt, or perhaps it was because of nervousness. No one was willing to look him in the eye. But what made people despair was that even though he seemed to still have some prestige, not a single Black Fire warrior obeyed his orders. The old tiger had lost its claws, lost its fangs. In the end, it no longer had the power of the past. Hu finally retracted his gaze and looked at the center of the crowd, at the man who was as majestic as a mountain. Huyen raised his eyes and looked at his father. The gazes of the father and son met in midair. It was as if there was a sudden explosion of thunder in the silence. Chapter 295. Huyan's tall and sturdy body was like a small mountain standing in the middle of the Black Fire tribe. At this moment, countless gazes were fixed on him. Everyone held their breath. Everyone had a feeling that this man's next decision and action might decide the future of the Black Fire tribe. This was a sudden situation that no one had expected. Huyan's uncharacteristic silence also intensified the tense atmosphere. Father and son, the old chief and the young chief, seemed to be confronting each other. After an unknown amount of time, Huyan's body suddenly moved. The surrounding people of the Black Fire tribe were startled. Then, they saw Huyan stride forward, still maintaining his silence. His eyes looked forward, but he was slowly walking towards the old Huahu. At this moment, countless Black Fire tribe barbarians changed their expressions. Even the brave warriors became nervous. Among them, the one who had the most drastic change in expression was Huaying. Huahu's grandson, Huyan's son, and regarded as the third-generation chief of the Black Fire tribe, had a look of terror on his face. With a loud shout, he stood in front of his grandfather, Huahu, and opened his arms to look at his father. He cried out in fear, "Father, are you crazy? What do you want?" The southern wilderness was a harsh place. Most of the barbarian tribes that lived here didn't have a good time. The warriors of each tribe were famous for their fierceness. But this didn't mean that these barbarians were all simple-minded, united, and friendly people. The killing between the barbarian tribes was extremely cruel, and it was not uncommon for the same tribe to kill each other. Not to mention fighting within the same tribe, even killing between blood relatives was common. Compared to the other tribes that had internal strife, the Black Fire tribe had always been united for many years. After all, ever since they fled back to the wilderness after the 1,000-year war, the tribe had been weak. Now, they could only struggle and live at the bottom of the wilderness. They did not have the capital to fight amongst themselves. If they did not unite, they would have been completely exterminated long ago. However, was this situation going to change today? As Huyan's heavy footsteps came closer and closer, Firehawk felt more and more pressure. Ever since he was young, he had worshipped and revered his father. Especially after his mother's early death, Huyan's nurturing of his son was completely from the perspective of a tribal warrior. Firehawk's greatest wish was to be qualified to take over his father's position in the future and lead the Black Fire tribe to continue surviving in the southern wilderness. If it was possible, he would make the tribe even stronger, kill even more enemies, and seize even more things. This was the Fire Eagle's current dream. In the tribe, the one who doted on him the most was his grandfather, Fire Tiger. Firehawk had never thought that one day, his grandfather, who doted on him the most, might actually have a conflict with the father he respected the most. He stood in front of his grandfather in a daze, not knowing what to do. He looked at the tall figure of his father who was already standing in front of him in horror. His body began to tremble slightly, but even now, he still had no intention of leaving. The young man clenched his teeth and gasped for breath. He forced himself to stand between the two closest relatives in the world and opened his arms, wanting to stop them from really starting a conflict. Huiyan's gaze left his father Fire Tiger's face and lowered his head to look at his son. The young man's face was very much like his own, stubbornness with a hint of fierceness and a hint of pleading in his eyes. With an expressionless face, he stretched out his hand and with a paw sound, Firehawk cried out in fear and staggered to the side. In the next moment, there was finally no more obstruction between Huiyan and Fire Tiger. The two generations of Black Fire Tribe chiefs finally stood face to face. The Black Fire Tribe was deathly silent, as if even the drop of a needle could be heard. Unlike the faintly frightened expressions of the surrounding Black Fire Tribe barbarians, including his grandson Fire Eagle, the old Fire Tiger, although his expression was stern from beginning to end, did not show the slightest hint of fear. On the contrary, as he looked at this tall and burly son who was slowly approaching him, a strange light quietly flashed across the depths of his eyes. Perhaps it was because he was too old and had experienced too much, but this old man had long seen through everything. He had let go of life and death, so he was no longer afraid. Or perhaps, he was just a simple barbarian, simple and pure. Thus, everyone heard Fire Tiger speak first. He asked Huiyan, "What do you want?" Huiyan looked straight into his father's eyes. At that moment, his heart seemed to suddenly throb. Many years ago, when he was also a young man, he looked up to his father just like Fire Eagle did now. Perhaps even his childhood wish was exactly the same. But, who could imagine what would happen many years later? Even barbarians could not predict their lives. Huiyan lowered his head slightly. After a moment, he said in a low voice, "Give me the Fire God staff." Fire Tiger's expression finally changed. He stared at Huiyan for a moment, then handed over the Fire God staff. At the same time, he said indifferently, "What, you want the position of tribe leader?" In the barbarian tribe, other than the priest who was known as the soul of the tribe, or the higher-ranking shaman, the most important people in the tribe were usually the tribe leader and the chief. The tribe leader was the leader of the tribe, overseeing the overall situation. The chief was usually the commander of the tribe's warriors, leading the warriors to fight to the death. He was the strongest military commander in the tribe, and his position in the tribe was only below the tribe leader. For many years, the tradition of the Black Fire Tribe had been passed down by the son after the death of the father. The father was the tribe leader, and the son became the chief of the warriors. Under the gaze of all the Black Fire Tribe barbarians, Huiyan reached out and took the Fire God staff. The half of the staff, known as the Fire God's divine weapon, lay quietly in his palm. He looked at his father, Fire Tiger, and shook his head, saying, "You think too much." He paused for a moment, then said, "I will send him away." After saying these two sentences, the tall and majestic barbarian turned around and strode in front of Lu Chen, saying, "Let's go." Lu Chen had seen everything that had happened between the father and son. At this moment, he could not understand what Huiyan was thinking. But no matter what, leaving the Black Fire Tribe was obviously a good thing for him, so Lu Chen did not hesitate and agreed. Then, he brought Atsu and followed behind Huiyan, slowly walking out of the Black Fire Tribe's camp. At this moment, the people of the Black Fire Tribe seemed to be able to catch their breath. Suddenly, there was an uproar, and many people began to whisper among themselves. At the same time, there were many people who secretly glanced at Huiyan. Huiyan turned a blind eye to these gazes. His pair of old and muddy eyes only stared at the backs of Huiyan and Lu Chen. Even when Huiying came over to support him, Huiyan did not have much of a reaction. Huiying was a little scared, and called out in a low voice, "Grandpa?" Huiyan suddenly grabbed Huiying's hand tightly. Huiying's body trembled, and he suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. He suddenly realized that this seemingly old grandfather of his was shockingly strong. And just as he was shocked, he heard a low and hoarse voice. It was Huiyan, using a voice that only he could hear, saying, "Follow him and watch carefully. Don't let your father leave." Huiying subconsciously agreed. Then Huiying let go of his hand, turned around, and walked back to his stone house. The dark shadows swallowed his figure in the house, making people unable to see this old man for a moment. The surrounding barbarians of the Black Fire tribe also began to slowly disperse. An internal strife that could have been a huge upheaval was resolved just like that. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Hence, no one paid any more attention to the fire hawks. Huaying lowered his head, and while no one was paying attention, he began to walk towards the entrance of the tribe's camp. At the same time, he suddenly thought of what his grandfather had just said. It was somewhat inexplicable, and he must have said something wrong. That human was very suspicious. Of course, he couldn't let him go so easily. According to Huaying's idea, it would be best to kill him directly. But how could his father, Huayan, leave? He was connected to the Black Fire tribe by blood. Leaving so easily was impossible. The young Huaying laughed to himself. Although he was still a little uneasy, he still quickly walked towards the entrance. From afar, he saw 3 figures standing outside the tribe. 2 people and a wolf. The unusually tall black wolf suddenly turned around to look at him. Then, as if it was mocking him, it bared its teeth at Huaying, revealing 2 snow-white fangs that were as sharp as blades. It seemed that in the next moment, it would stab into Huaying's heart and bite off his neck. Chapter 296. The sky had unknowingly darkened, and the day was about to pass. The 2 people standing outside the Black Fire tribe, Huayan and Lu Chen, looked completely out of place. Their postures and expressions were completely different from each other. One of them was a ferocious, tall, and ferocious-looking barbarian, while the other was a calm, reserved, and composed human. Even Atsu, the huge black wolf demonic beast that was squatting beside Lu Chen, seemed to be more compatible with the barbarian Huayan than with the human, Lu Chen. The 2 looked at each other for a while, and neither spoke. Finally, it was Lu Chen who sighed and said, "Do you have any plans now?" Huayan's face no longer showed the anger from before, and he looked much calmer. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "I still believe that you are a priest sent by the fire god to save our Black Fire tribe." Lu Chen shrugged his shoulders and said, "Looks like your tribe doesn't believe me." Huayan said expressionlessly, "One day, they will believe me." As he said this, he frowned and said, "I remember you once said that when the old priest gave you the fire god's staff, he told you to bring this divine weapon back to the wilderness and deliver it to the fire god altar." Lu Chen wanted to say something, but stopped. A hint of vigilance flashed across his eyes and he said, "What do you mean?" Huayan said, "The people in the tribe can't accept your identity for the time being. Even my father is the same. So, I can't let you become the priest of our Black Fire tribe right now. But this is also good. We can take this opportunity to go to the fire god altar together. Since the fire god has already passed down a divine decree for you to go there, there must be a deeper meaning." Lu Chen was startled and said, "Together?" Huayan nodded and said, "That's right. This is your first time here, so you don't understand the situation. This fire god altar is actually a secret holy land passed down by our Black Fire tribe since ancient times. It is said that in ancient times, when the fire god descended to the world, he appeared there. Now, in order to prevent the sacred place from being spied on by outsiders, the location of the fire god altar has been strictly protected by our tribe. Only the patriarch's bloodline has been passed down from generation to generation. Now in this world, only father and I know of that place." He took a deep breath and said, "So, if I don't bring you there, you might never find that place." Lu Chen was silent. A moment later, he suddenly smiled. After that, he looked at Huayan and said, "You've probably forgotten what I told you, right?" Huayan said, "What?" "I'm not the emissary of your fire god. I've never felt or heard of any god's decree. It was an accident that I got the fire god's staff. I've never thought of becoming a priest of your Black Fire tribe. Even my coming to the southern wilderness was also an inexplicable accident." Huayan suddenly interrupted Lu Chen and said resolutely and decisively, "Have you ever thought that perhaps this is the will of the fire god that allowed you to come to our Black Fire tribe?" Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. Looking at Huiyan's unswerving and resolute expression, a feeling of helplessness welled up in his heart. At this point, he already understood that it was probably impossible to convince this seemingly powerful and persistent barbarian. Perhaps to him, since birth, he had always believed in the fire god and would never waver in the slightest. Therefore, Lu Chen decisively changed his angle and directly said to Huiyan, "All right, I won't talk nonsense with you anymore. Right now, I don't want to be the priest." "What are you going to do, kill me?" Huiyan's breathing became slightly heavier and an ominous glint flashed in the depths of his eyes. But very quickly, he restrained himself and said in a deep voice, "Can you tell me the reason?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "Do I still need to say it? Wasn't it obvious enough at the tribe just now? Just like how your father and the others look at me. You are barbarians and I am a human. When we meet, we will fight to the death. No one will believe the other." "I believe you." Huiyan said, "The fire god sent you here. No matter who you are, I will definitely believe you." Lu Chen paused and shook his head. "It's useless even if you believe me. You're not the only person in the Black Fire tribe." Huiyan said, "I can let them slowly accept you." Lu Chen said, "All right, even if you're really so powerful that you can change everyone's mind, you can't change my own mind. I am a human and I don't really know your witchcraft. So, it's impossible for me to become the Black Fire tribe's priest." "What's so bad about being our priest?" Huiyan looked a little agitated. "As long as you really do it, even if you are a human, our Black Fire tribe, starting from me, will definitely revere and respect you. We will not dare to slight you. And in this vast wilderness, besides our tribe, all the other barbarians will want to kill you the moment they see you. Only we can protect you. If I become a priest, maybe I will die faster." "What?" Huiyan was suddenly startled. Lu Chen looked at him meaningfully and said, "The tribe's priest position is so important and noble. How can you be sure that everyone will obey a human like me? Not to mention other things, your father and that son of yours are arrogant and unruly. Will they obey me?" Huiyan immediately fell silent. Lu Chen continued, "Besides that, if I sit in this position, I will be the target of everyone. Without power, the tribesmen will not obey me. With power, the other tribes will see me as a thorn in their side. There will definitely be wars and assassinations. When that time comes, I won't even be able to sleep peacefully. Why should I live such a life?" The corner of Huiyan's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something but stopped. Looking at Lu Chen's bright eyes, he sighed after a long while and said, "Since ancient times, it has been said that you humans are the most treacherous and cunning. Today, it seems that you really live up to your reputation." "Nonsense." Lu Chen bluntly retorted, "I just don't want to die. You look like a straightforward person on the outside, but on the inside, you are really cunning." Huiyan snorted and didn't argue with Lu Chen. After thinking for a while, he suddenly said, "Then is there any way that you can help our Black Fire tribe?" "No." Lu Chen didn't show any politeness towards this barbarian and directly rejected him. But very quickly, Huiyan suddenly smiled. That smile seemed a little mysterious, and on his fierce face, it seemed slightly out of place. He lowered his voice and took a step forward, getting closer to Lu Chen. In a low voice, he said, "Then what if I say that I might have a way for you to return to the north?" "What?" For thousands of years, the separation of the north and south had long been a matter deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Not to mention the southern barbarians, even the flourishing and powerful human cultivators in the north were helpless against the incomparably dangerous disorienting lands. If there really was a passage in the disorienting lands that connected the north and south, the human cultivator army would have long ago attacked. To Lu Chen, Huiyan's words were so fake that he wanted to laugh. But when he saw the serious expression on Huiyan's face, he couldn't help but swallow the words that were on the tip of his tongue. After a moment of silence, he said, "Are you joking?" "No." Huiyan said. "Do you know of a secret passage that can allow me to return to the north?" "Yes." "I don't believe you." Lu Chen suddenly sneered. The enmity between our two races is as deep as the sea. If there really was such a passage, the barbarians would have long since killed their way there. Hui Yan shook his head. That passage is incomparably dangerous. Ordinary people can't pass through it. If a large army were to head there, it would only result in complete annihilation. On the contrary, if it was a single person, perhaps there would be a chance. Lu Chen sneered. Do you think I will believe your ridiculous words? Hui Yan stared at him and suddenly took a step forward. This time, he whispered in Lu Chen's ear in the lowest voice possible. At first, Lu Chen's expression was still somewhat cold. But very quickly, he revealed a look of astonishment. Then, his eyebrows furrowed and he fell into deep thought. Even after Hui Yan finished speaking and took a few steps back, Lu Chen was still in deep thought for a while. After a while, he looked up at Hui Yan and asked, "Is this true?" Hui Yan's expression was indifferent. He reached into a beast skin bag at his waist and felt around for a while. Then, he threw something over. Lu Chen grabbed it and looked at it carefully. It was half a broken wooden tablet. It was dark brown in color and half the size of a palm. He could vaguely see a picture carved on one side. It was twisted and stretched. It was neither a word nor a seal. For a moment, he couldn't tell what it looked like. However, Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. His gaze was fixed on the wooden tablet. After a long while, he let out a long breath and threw the wooden tablet back to Hui Yan. Hui Yan caught it and stared at Lu Chen. How is it? Do you recognize this thing? Lu Chen slowly said, Consider yourself lucky. There aren't many people in this world who can recognize this thing, but I just happen to be one of them. A light flashed in Hui Yan's eyes. Then you believe me? Lu Chen was silent for a long time. Then, he said, although what you said is a little absurd, I believe you. Hui Yan quietly clenched his fist and took a step forward. You're willing to help me? Lu Chen slowly nodded. Even if there's only a sliver of hope, I don't want to stay here. Good. Hui Yan resolutely said. I swear to you, as long as you can help me and make the Black Fire tribe strong again, I will tell you the secret that can let you return to the north. If I violate this oath, let the fire god punish me and make me die a horrible death. Lu Chen looked at him, but shook his head and said, No. Hui Yan frowned. What? Lu Chen stared at him and said word by word, I don't want your life. If you want to swear, do it in the name of the entire Black Fire tribe. If you lie to me in the future, then the fire god will betray you and send down divine punishment. The Black Fire tribe will be exterminated from this world. Hui Yan was furious. He growled like a giant beast and grabbed Lu Chen's chest with both hands, almost lifting him up. Beside him, Atsu also jumped up in fright. He bared his sharp fangs at Hui Yan and growled. Hui Yan ignored Atsu and looked at Lu Chen with a pair of bloodthirsty eyes. You dare to curse the Black Fire tribe? Lu Chen's face showed no fear. He only said lightly, What, you don't dare to make this oath? You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.